So it's looking like our participants are slowing down and they're entering the meeting. So I think we'll get this started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the DFDM Collaborative Conference. Glad you could be here today. Thank you for joining us with the kind of the modified format. It's something we're all getting used to of coming to these virtual events. So hopefully everything goes smoothly today and just welcome. So currently we're in our 29th year of providing this conference. It's consistently one of the best events. And a lot of that's because of the planning team and all the people that went into planning and making this possible. Special shout out to ACEC Wisconsin, AIA, the DFDM folks, and everyone that helped us come together today to put on the conference. We're excited to highlight some of the special groups we have with us. There's a lot of folks from DFDM, as well as representatives from 9 different state agencies and universities. We have many ACEC Wisconsin and AIA members in attendance. Overall, we're at 230 registrants, which is our biggest event since 2013. So thank you very much for being here today. And I'd also personally like to thank ACEC Wisconsin member firms who showed tons and tons of support through their sponsorship this year. Our gold sponsors for today, I'll just read them off here. They're AIA Wisconsin, Regio Software Technologies, Ayers and Associates, Beecher Hoppy, Clark Dietz, FGM Architects, Grafe, Jewel Associates Engineers, KL Engineering, Mead and Hunt, MSA Professional Services, Ruckert Milky, and Strand Associates. So thank you, a big thank you to all of our gold sponsors. So if you're here today and you want CES credits, there'll be an opportunity to fill out an evaluation form after the end of the conference today. That'll pop up automatically when you close out of the Zoom meeting, or there'll be an email that gets sent out to you, or there'll be a link where you can fill out the evaluation form. As part of that form, or as part of getting the CESs or PDHs, we have to verify your attendance, the email address that you used to sign into today. We're gonna check that just to verify your attendance. So look for that at the end of the session. Feedback is always great. We love to make the session or the conference better and better every year and more applicable to everyone out there. So the evaluation and the feedback that we get is our springboard for planning the conference next year. So obviously today is a little bit different being virtual than we're used to. So in order to kind of keep us all connected, it'd be great if you could share your thoughts on social media. And if you do that, just use the hashtag DFDM conference, and hopefully that'll keep us all connected. Today, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, there's a couple different ways to do that. First, there's the Q&A feature. You can just type in the question that you have in the Q&A box, and whoever's presenting will have the opportunity to see that question and can either type an answer for everyone in attendance to see, or they can wait till the end at the Q&A portion and they might answer, or they'll answer at that time if they don't do it while they're presenting. The second way is to use the raise hand feature. If you raise your hand during the Q&A portion at the end of the session, we'll be able to unmute you. You'll be able to ask your question live and directly to the presenter. All right, and with that, I think we're ready to move into our first session of what's new at DFDM. It's my pleasure to introduce Kevin Trinastic. Kevin is the Director of the Bureau of Architecture and Engineering within DFDM. He's got a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Engineering from Milwaukee School of Engineering. He joined the state, or prior to joining the state, Kevin worked in the private sector doing a variety of project types throughout the United States. He joined the division in 2007 as project manager, and then he served as a team lead and the section chief before becoming the bureau director in 2016. Kevin also serves as the division's ranking architect on the State Building Commission. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Kevin.
Okay, can everybody hear me now? There we go. And I put myself on video so everybody can see me. Thank you, Aaron, for that introduction. I would like to start out by saying good morning and happy Monday to everybody. It's kind of interesting going virtual for the first time for the ACEC Wisconsin DFDM Collaborative Conference and not being able to see everybody face to face and speaking to so many people, but we're glad we were able to pull this together with ACEC, and hopefully it'll be a great morning event. First, I would like to thank ACEC Wisconsin for their time and effort coordinating this day with DFDM. And thanks to all the DFDM staff attending virtually and those taking the time to prepare and present today. Specifically, I would like to thank Andrew Heike of ACEC Wisconsin and Jake Emke from DFDM, the Deputy Director for Bureau of Architecture and Engineering, for leading the coordination of today's conference agenda and speakers. Thanks also to the state agency staff attending today and all of you from the engineering, architect, and construction community who have come together today at this event. I believe we can all agree that the year of 2020 has been an interesting year due to COVID-19. It has made us change how we typically have worked, whether working more remotely, doing more virtually, and definitely being more creative to deliver the State of Wisconsin building program. In a collaborative effort with all of you out there, the agencies continue to submit projects. DFDM continues to deliver these projects with you, the AEC community. We also continue to engage the AEC community on varying topics and recommendations for the similar to like the DFDM AE Policy Procedure Manual updates, taking your input and using it where appropriate, as well as potential new technology that may benefit state building projects. Today's speakers and agendas will cover some of these efforts in further detail this morning. But before we get into the full agenda, I would like to share with you a few staffing updates from the DFDM Bureau of Architecture and Engineering. So over the past year and a half, we've had quite a few changes in staff. So I just want to mention the names of them, even though we won't be able to network with them today and see them in person. But in 2019, we had a few BA staff retirements, Russ Van Gelder and John Jensen. And this year in 2020, retired Bill Napier from project delivery section, Jim Kropp from the mechanical team, and Casey New recently from the construction representative Madison region. As far as internal BA staff updates, in 2019, Jake Emke became the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Architecture and Engineering. Owen Landsberg became a construction coordinator in the Northeast part of the state. Casey Coddington became the mechanical team leader. Clevin McChesney became the electrical team leader. And more recently in 2020, Wendy Von Balo became a project delivery team leader, and Christine Anderson also became a project delivery team leader. As far as new staff to BAE, I didn't have an opportunity last year to present this at ACEC, so I'm going back to 2019 on some of these a little bit. So in 2019, Matt Dapp and Tim Holman both joined the project delivery section as project managers. Chris Steffen joined the mechanical engineering team. Paul Lippett, the plumbing and fire protection team, and Tom Oldenburg, the construction rep Southwest section and region. And in 2020, this year, we have added quite a few new staff. Ravio Valkunis, project delivery section, and recently Casey Ward and Steve Wenzel, who have just started with us. So you'll be hearing their names as well from the project delivery section. Kyle Ewing joined the electrical team. Robert Woodnick, Jim Ridemark, David Fisher, Pedro Avina, and Kyle Cerniak all joined the construction section, each in a separate region. So those names will be coming up. And that's all the updates for this section. At this time, I would now like to turn this over to Jake Emke, the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Architecture and Engineering, who will provide some DFDM BAE general updates of this past year.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate the introduction. Again, this is Jake Emke. So you heard all the personnel updates. I just wanted to touch on a few items that Kevin had listed here, just respect to DFDM and Bureau of Architecture and Engineering Operations. So first of all, touching on working virtual, Kevin a little bit alluded to it. I mean, that's been a little bit of the new norm for a lot of us. The majority of the BAE staff have been working virtual since mid-March, and we expect that to continue at least through the end of the year. So that involves the project delivery and engineering sections. The construction section, the reps, the coordinators, the inspectors have largely been unaffected. They're still getting out to project sites, wearing masks, maintaining social distancing, and really ensuring the success of the delivery of capital projects. So like many of you, I'm sure we're really leveraging Skype, Teams, Zoom, other platforms and technologies to ensure project success. First couple weeks being a little bit clunky working remotely, but I think we've really become as efficient or maybe even more efficient in delivering projects. So that's not to say we're not still getting out to a meeting or two here and there, but primarily still working virtual. In terms of processes, after the virtual work started, we went to electronic contract signing. So that's for both AE and construction contracts, facilitating all through DocuSign, minimizing hard copies. And then also some pretty extensive and quick adjustments to bidding. So we're now accepting email bids, as well as hard copy bids, and then bid openings are conducted over Skype. So at this point, no longer having contractors come to the 7th floor of the DOA building, cram into room 721 and hear those in person. Those are being conducted over Skype. In terms of virtual interviews, so many of you are probably aware that any project in the higher budgetary threshold, so at this point over 7.4 million, we have to interview AE teams for consultant selection in person. Well, after the first month or two of working virtually and realizing that there really wasn't an end in sight, we worked through the logistics of how we would conduct virtual AE interviews. So the first virtual AE interview we did through Microsoft Teams was on June 22nd, and that was for the new UW-Milwaukee Engineering Building. And to date, we've done 6 total virtual interviews for major projects, and I expect that to continue doing major project interviews every 2 to 3 weeks for the foreseeable future. Kevin touched on it briefly, a policy procedure manual update. We did our last policy procedure manual update in late 2018. I think a lot of you are familiar with the document. It is not perfect, but I think it really has a good roadmap of the kind of initiation and delivery of DFDM projects. My intent and my hope is working with an internal team to roll out a subsequent update before the end of 2020. And we realize that there's some things that need tweaks, further clarification, etc. So by all means, if you in the AE community or in the agency community, if you see things that are constantly tripping you up, or hey, it would be great if you could elaborate on this a little further, by all means, email me. A few consultant partners have done that already. And it's great feedback that we don't often internally see. We work with the document daily and kind of get so encompassed in it, we don't see some of the pitfalls. So if you have recommendations that you'd be willing to send over, I'd be more than happy to look at those and potentially implement those into the next version's update. Bluebeam. So Bluebeam is not a new technology, been used through the industry for quite some time, but at this point, all the BAE project managers have Bluebeam and have started using Bluebeam more and more. So what does this mean for you? We currently have a technical review process, which has been and still sort of is very paper-based, very PDF-based, and more than anything, very text comment-based. So writing out comments, technical review comments in text format, and maybe a Word document, and then pasting 10, 20, 50, 200 comments into WISPIL that you as the AE community need to respond to. So that's very cumbersome, inefficient, and we're looking at right now, how would we implement Bluebeam into our technical review process by initiating review sessions, and then also taking that collaborative review file and then how that's saved, how that's transferred, and then most importantly, how the AE reviews and responds to all those comments. So they're working through those logistics right now. I don't really have a timeline, but know that that's a priority for us to hopefully implement in the not so distant future. I think that would be a good improvement for everyone on this conference and everyone on this call, and it will allow projects to be delivered and comments to be captured more efficiently and accurately. WISP-Build replacement. So I believe we mentioned last year that we were pursuing a replacement to the WISP-Build project management software. WISP-Build was pretty state-of-the-art 20 years ago. It still gets the job done in terms of delivering projects, utilized frequently during construction. But we are going through the process of replacing that with hopefully a more current and updated and state-of-the-art software. So the only update I guess I have at this point is we're working and navigating through the procurement process and hope to have further updates for everyone on this call and the ACEC group in the coming months. Final item I wanted to touch on was sustainability. Sustainability is a priority on DFDM projects and is an extreme priority for the EVERS administration. So a team of internal DFDM staff and external consultants work through pretty much all of 2020 to date to initiate and develop new sustainability guidelines. So I'm gonna not give too much more detail at this point. We've got a few others yet in this 8 a.m. session that are gonna take hopefully around 20 minutes to give a little more deeper dive into what the sustainability guideline entails. But these guidelines go in effect October 1st for any project that is advertised for AE services on or after October 1st. So if your project was advertised before that date, it would still be great to implement sustainable strategies and guidelines into that project. But in terms of having to draw a line and say this is when it is required, the October 1st date is what we selected. So Wendy Von Balo, Doug Shore, and Sanjay Olson will elaborate on that in more detail in just a few minutes here. So with that, those are a few, like I said, general updates. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Tondra Davis. Tondra is the director of the Wisconsin Supplier Diversity Program, and she has a few words to say to the group this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As you mentioned, I'm Tondra Davis, and I am the director of the Supplier Diversity Program. And I'd like to thank DFDM and ACEC for allowing me to speak to you today. If you could go to the next slide. Just to tell you a little bit more about the Supplier Diversity Program, our mission is that we certify minority-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned, and women-owned businesses. And we do that so that they can have a better opportunity to do business with the state of Wisconsin. And when they do business with the state of Wisconsin, it helps the state achieve its diverse spending goals. Next slide. And so I mentioned that we certify. So we certify the minority-owned business enterprises, which we call MBEs, and we just authenticate that they are truly managed, owned, and controlled by the diverse groups that they are named after. So we do that also for our DVBs, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, and our WBEs, the women-owned businesses. Next slide. And I should also mention, on that previous slide, and you'll see it again, if there are any businesses out there who are MBE, WBE, or DVB, we have our website that you can go to perhaps if you would like to certify with us, we would love to have you on board. And so we do that, and because the state has a diverse spend goal. And so the goal the state has with spending with MBEs is 5% statewide and DVBs 1% statewide. Another way that we help our certified suppliers is they receive the MBEs and the DVBs, they receive a 5% preference. Oftentimes people ask about the WBE program, and currently in our state statutes, there is no spend goal with them and they don't currently receive a preference. Next slide. So just want to talk to you a bit about, told you our goal. Well, our goal with MBEs is 5% and 1% with DVBs, as I mentioned. And you can see here a chart from 2015 to 2019. The very top line, I know it may be difficult to see, is the 5%. We have not reached that goal except in the last 35 years or so, except about 4 times. And you can see the last several years, the number has been trending down. And as you can imagine, the state's numbers, the overall spend number is trending down. And unfortunately in DFDM, architecture and engineering, that number has trended down as well. Next slide. And so I'm here today to just say we need your help. For those who are bidding on projects, I know oftentimes you may be a sole contractor on your projects, but when you do have opportunity, we ask that you spend at least 5% with the MBs and DVBs. That will certainly help us meet our goal. And then also for the agencies and project managers that are out there, we ask that you consider diverse suppliers as you go through your projects. We know that there are small A&E projects. Sometimes you have best judgments. And even when you do a simplified bid, I know you request from at least 3 suppliers. Be sure to include one of them as a diverse supplier. And to get help with that, finding our diverse suppliers, there you see our website again, WISDP, which stands for Wisconsin Supplier Diversity, .wi.gov. We have a wonderful database there where you can search our certified suppliers. Next slide. And I just want to thank you for having me today. That is my email address if you have questions, if you need help with anything with supplier diversity, I'd love to be able to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tandra. At this point, I will now turn it over to Wendy Van Belo, who is a team leader in the Project Delivery Services section of the Bureau of Architecture and Engineering, Doug Shore, who is the Engineering Technical Services Section Chief, and Sanjay Olson, who is the Director of Enterprise Quality Assurance at BAE. And he will be talking about, or they will all be talking about, the 2020 Sustainability Guideline Update. So thank you, guys.
Good morning. Thank you, Jake. I wanted to kick off the sustainability session. As Jake mentioned, we'll be speaking about 20 minutes. And trying to get my PowerPoint to move forward. There we go. Sanjay.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Sanjay Olson, the Director of Enterprise Quality Assurance for DFDM. As Jake mentioned, I've been with DFDM for about a year now and spent 25 or 26 years at DNR before I came over here. So thank you for the opportunity. Doug, I think you do your intro.
Hi, I'm Doug Shore. I'm the section chief of the engineering section at DFDM. I've been at the state about 20 years, and prior to that, I was a consulting engineer for about 15 years.
Thank you, Doug. And as I mentioned, I'm Wendy Von Belo. I'm a team leader. I've been at DFDM 7 years now. And prior to that, I was also in the private sector, and I was participating in the team that developed the sustainability guidelines.
All right, this is Sanjay Olson again. I'm going to just give a quick overview, and then I'll be turning things over to Wendy in a moment here. So our agenda for the sustainability discussion is we're going to go through these 5 key points. We're going to talk about sustainability, kind of where we were as a state, specifically with DFDM, talk a little bit about the DFDM building program and kind of where things are at in the overall program itself that a lot of you are already familiar with. The process of how we develop the current guideline, the sustainability guideline. We're going to give an overview of those new guidelines. And then lastly, we're going to leave some time at the end for any questions or thoughts folks have. Next slide, Wendy. All right, sustainability, where we were. And again, this is, I think a lot of folks are familiar with this, but our previous guidelines were based loosely off LEED, the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design 2.0. And I think we ran that for quite a few years that over time, obviously upgraded or moved to 4.0. So the new version that was on our site and that we've been using through a lot of our capital development programs is the 4.0 version. One of the advantages to LEED is it has the project checklist, which gives an opportunity to make sure you go through and see where there's opportunities. One of the challenges, and I'm coming from an agency, and I think other agencies and institutions faced it, is the checklist also fits into a certification program that often requires some sort of payment to get to certain levels. And at times that didn't always make sense for some particular projects and whatnot. So certainly had some benefits, but also some challenges. As Jake had mentioned earlier, the sustainability is a priority for this governor. And I think for past governors that we've gone forward, it's always been a priority for DFDM. So sustainability is still considered and implemented on capital projects, and something that we're moving forward on. And we'll talk more about that. Next slide. Okay, overview of the DFDM building program. Again, many folks have worked with DFDM before and state projects are familiar. But one of the onuses of the program within DOA is to deliver these state capital programs across the state. There's typically 1,800 to 2,000 projects going on at any one time, totaling about $3 billion. So it's a very large program, pretty unique to the country in terms of how we do our work. That encompasses the UW system and all 13 campuses, as well as the cabinet level agencies, DNR, DOC, DHS, DOT, etc. So it creates a lot of really interesting work, a lot of variety in the projects. And as you see here, it's everything from smaller projects at the different agencies and institutions, like DNR boat launches, or smaller projects across the enterprise, and also the very large 100 million plus projects at academic facilities on campuses and institutions. So as you can imagine, a program that can manage things small and large, and also with a variety of complexities and different programs can be challenging, but also exciting. So we've been working through that. One thing to keep in mind is, as before, and moving on even more in focus, is sustainability initiatives while we deliver those projects. And as Jake had mentioned, there's going to be opportunities where we're going to encourage sustainability throughout the projects, but also times when it's actually required. And again, we'll talk more about that going forward. And with that, I believe I turned over to Wendy.
Thank you, Sanjay. So to talk a little bit about the process for how we got to where we are with the guidelines, about a year ago, we started to look at various programs that exist out in the community. So we did look at LEED, we looked at well building, we looked at Fit Well, Living Building Challenge, Green Globes, many programs, and always trying to keep in mind the importance of sustainability, but how it would fit for this particular diverse building program. And eventually we narrowed it down to working with the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. And then in the spring, we started in earnest to tailor that framework and began by meeting with some consultants. So we worked with OPN, HTA, Smith Group, and Maria Redman, who is the director of the DOA Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. And we really dug deep into each of the guidelines. We held bi-weekly meetings to collaborate, and eventually distributed those guidelines live on August 1st for use in agency planning with their capital budgets. Again, these guidelines are based on the AI Institute of Architects Framework for Design Excellence. There are 10 of them. And another key point was trying to ensure that we address the intentions of Executive Order number 38. So you'll see in the guidelines that are on our website that we require still, of course, to have them be aligned with our policy and procedure manual, which, as Jake mentioned, is also getting updated, and with our master specs and design guidelines. What we did was we actually took that AIA framework and we made some requirements and recommendations out of the framework so that there are more specifics to follow. And we based these categories on new construction or major renovation, tenant improvement, site and civil, and equipment replacement. And then used some tiers for dollar values to help ensure that we're working towards those particular goals. So we're still recommending that all projects, regardless of their size and type, are evaluated against the guidelines and used during scope development on every single project. We do have some deliverables that are required. Again, those fall into kind of mandatory and encouraged. The idea is that initially each project will have a meeting to establish their goals, and then each measure will be submitted during preliminary review and final review with a follow-up kind of report in terms of the design report appendix. So again, it'll be based on, some will have more requirements, some will have less, but all projects should be using the guidelines. With that, I'll turn this over to Doug.
So one of the key components of this guideline, of course, is whatever we're going to have for an energy guideline. And if some of you remember, we used to have some years back a requirement that all of our projects be, quote, 30% better than code. And it was fairly cumbersome to use because of the amount of analysis that was done. There was a lot of, frankly, inaccuracy in the analysis that was done to show whether or not we were complying with that standard. So we considered, a lot of different things. We kind of tried to back up and think about what are the things we really want to accomplish. Well, obviously we want to increase energy efficiency in our buildings in some measurable way. We want it to be easy to understand and to implement. We don't want to burden the AEs with some, unusual method of complying with the standard. Easy to apply on a wide variety of projects because we have such a wide variety of projects, and to use methods and measures that are common in the industry. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We want to utilize methods that are already being utilized by the AE community. Next slide, please. So we kind of settled on two basic things. First is we are going to require all of our projects to meet ASHRAE 90.1 2016. Some people would call this a stretch code because it's basically one version ahead of what's currently required by DSPS. So currently, projects in the state of Wisconsin have to meet the 2015 IECC, which is basically based on the 2013 ASHRAE 90.1. So we're basically jumping ahead one version. The second thing is for larger projects, where we have a lot of opportunity, we're going to have a EUI requirement expressed in kBtu per square foot. So the intent there is to just push a little harder beyond ASHRAE 90.1 to, get a little bit better energy performance out of our buildings. Next slide, please. So ASHRAE 90.1 2016. Like I just said, currently we need to meet the IECC 2015, which is based on 2013 ASHRAE. We're basically jumping ahead one code. The good thing is it's a comprehensive standard. Everything's been coordinated in it. It's kind of the gold standard, if you will. It's like the Bible for energy efficiency for commercial buildings. Very well coordinated, very well thought out. The requirements have been, theoretically, they've been sort of tested and, looked at to make sure that they make sense and that they are economically beneficial. So we it's obviously a really good standard. Everyone knows how to use it. We don't have to define what kind of, how you apply it to our projects. It's all contained in the standard. And it results in an energy reduction compared to the what is the IECC right now of approximately 8%. So it gives us a little bit of a bump in energy efficiency compared to the current code. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, like I said, we're going to have a EUI requirement. And the reason we did this is, again, to push a little harder beyond the ASHRAE requirement. And the reasons that we chose this particular metric is it's a very straightforward metric that most CAEs are already familiar with. It's becoming more prevalent in the industry. It's becoming more prevalent for different organizations for their requirements, versus a lead requirement that's a percentage better than ASHRAE or a code requirement. More and more entities are going to this energy utilization index as a requirement for their buildings. It tells us the anticipated energy consumption, and we can compare it, real numbers, comparisons from building to building, which is meaningful, right? I mean, that's really the bottom line, is how much energy is the building using? And it eliminates what I call games that get used when we're designing to code or just to ASHRAE. And so for you folks that aren't in the energy modeling world, when I say games, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but you could have a building, I'll give an example. You could have a building that had X amount of ventilation required in it. And you apply all of the required efficiencies or equipment efficiencies that are required to that design, and you end up with 100 units of energy consumption. You can double the ventilation in the building for whatever reason, and because that's your choice, and you've just doubled the energy consumption of the ventilation air, but you implement some sort of a more efficient energy recovery system on that option. And in the end, your energy consumption in option B is actually higher than option A, maybe significantly. But if you're comparing it to code, it's going to look like it's more efficient. So those kinds of things happen all over the place in the code. And so we just want to cut to the chase and say, we want to reduce energy consumption however you can. If it's by shutting the building off sooner in the day, whatever it is, that's what we want to do. Another reason is it pushes, like I just said, it pushes teams to reduce energy in any way possible, not just within the confines of how the code works, but any way possible. We set the another nice thing is we set the UI numbers ourselves, and we can adjust them as we think is appropriate. So we did quite a bit of work trying to decide what to set them at initially. We looked at some of our existing buildings that we're able to get information on, as well as some of the standards in the industry, and tried to kind of weigh those two things and come up with numbers. So we will be watching that very closely as we move forward, implementing this and determining if we need to make adjustments to those numbers. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it.
That's it. So with that, I think we'd like to open it up to questions. We have a very quiet group for this Monday morning. If I'm not seeing any questions, then I would like to thank everybody for participating in this. We do have a sustainability email that you can that is shown on our website. You can contact us and we will get back to you with any questions or comments that you might have about the guidelines. Again, as Jake mentioned, we really do encourage those types of questions. It really helps us tweak and refine. It's intended to be a very living document that we continue to make improvements on. And with that, I would like—
Wendy, sorry for interrupting. We just have one question come in relative to the subject. So I wanted to,
okay.
Actually, we just had a couple come in. So I wanted
now I'm seeing them. Okay, they're starting to come in.
Yep, so one in the chat feature and one in the question and answer. So if you want to try to catch those quick before you turn it over to the
Great.
next.
So I'm looking at the question and answer from Chris Love. How does the newer energy standard work with ComCheck for compliance? And that would be one for Doug to answer.
Well, I'm not super familiar with ComCheck, but ComCheck is basically the quick check on the billing envelope, I believe. So if you're running ComCheck relative to the IECC, that isn't going to show compliance with ASHRAE 90.1 2016. I'm not sure if there's a ComCheck associated with ASHRAE 2016 or not, but I guess I'm not real up to speed on ComCheck, but my understanding is it's associated with the code. Our standard is going to be more stringent than the code. So I don't know, but I don't think ComCheck's going to show compliance with our standard.
Thank you. And then Doug, there's another one for you from Tyson Glimmy. Where will the EUIs be documented?
So when you say documented, they will be in the standard. There's a table in the standard that shows what the requirements are. They will be documented in terms of the individual projects reporting in a few different ways. I mean, there's going to be peer reviews. There's going to be a couple different reviews in there, and it will get documented for the design that way. And to be honest with you, we're still kind of working on a little bit of formatting for that. But the bottom line is you're going to submit a form or some documentation that shows what your number is. But in terms of what the requirement is, that's right in our standard. That's going to get posted this week, or reposted this week, I should say.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure that I save some time for the other speakers for this session. And so I'd like to thank Doug and Sanjay for joining me on the sustainability session and introduce our Deputy Administrator, RJ Benoit.
Well, Wendy, thank you very much. Everybody, I'm trying to bring my video up so you can see me, but in the meantime, let's just keep talking. So on behalf of Naomi Demers, the Division Administrator of the Division of Facilities Development and Management, thank you all for participating in this conference. Naomi couldn't make it today because of a conflict, and so she's asked me to say a few words. What I would say to all of you is you've heard a lot of great information already about the movement that DFDM is making to improve the state building program, from making sure we're as fully staffed as we can be, to working on our policies and procedures manual, to all the reactions that we have been able to make and had to make due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. And what I would say is, on behalf of Naomi and actually all of the leadership at the Department of Administration, I want to thank all of you for your assistance in making all of these things possible. Without your participation and your assistance, we couldn't make the improvements that we've made, the changes that we've made, and have them be the success that they already are, and we hope to continue into the future. We are always looking to make improvements in how we do business. We are always trying to make, there we go. Everybody can see me in my backyard from my kitchen table. That's my new virtual office, is my kitchen table. So good to see everybody, or hopefully it's golf for you. Good to see you. Good to see me. So we're always looking to make improvements in how we're doing business, and to keep the process of the state building program moving forward. I would just like to highlight one improvement that we're trying to make in our system that has started to have some negative impact on us, which is why we're highlighting it today and looking to make some improvements. And that's the need going forward to make sure that we have solidified and locked down our equipment lists that we need on our capital projects at the time of design report. We have a couple of projects now where we are well into design, into construction, and we still have not finalized our equipment list, and it's starting to have some negative impact, and we really need to move the needle on that, especially as equipment gets more and more complicated and gets more and more integrated into our building systems. The need is there to move the finalization and lockdown of equipment lists earlier and earlier in the process. So as you get an opportunity to work with your agency partners, and there is a substantial amount of capitalized equipment that's part of your capital project, we need to get those answers solidified as soon as possible to help with the final design, the bidding documents, and of course, an estimate of budget need. We are in uncharted territory when it comes to these budgets as the economy continues its fits and its starts. And so the more we know up front, the better it's going to be for all of us. So I would make a pitch as we continue to make all the great improvements that we're making, that I make a pitch for working hard to see if we can't solidify our equipment list at the time of design report and have the equipment list be part of the design report appendix when that deliverable is being required. You'll work more closely with Jake, Kevin, Jake, and the folks at BAE on that, but know that I look at these lists and I'm deeply involved in what's going on with those and the budgets. And for those of you who don't have any experience with me, for years I was the budget director and the bureau director of the Bureau of Capital Budget and Construction Administration. So I was sort of the lead staff person on the capital budget. I still play that role. Right now, we do not have a bureau director. We are in the process of recruiting that bureau director. So I'm back in that role along with Sanjay Olson, who's helping out in an interim way until we can get ourselves a new bureau director. But when it comes to the budget, I want to talk about the current budget that we're in, the 1921 budget, and give you a sort of a headline on what's going to be happening with the 21-23 budget. So as we look at the 1921 budget, if not the largest, it was one of the largest capital budgets that the state has ever appropriated and enumerated. And we are quite thankful to the governor, the building commission members, and the rest of the legislature for their confidence in giving us this kind of a capital budget. It gives us all something to do, and so I'm sure we're all pretty happy with that. As we look at our enumerated projects, the individual projects, we are well over 90% on those individual projects, of having most of those projects either in construction or in design, some form of design. So we're pretty happy about that. Some of our more categorical enumerations we're working our way through, but we are working hard with our agency partners to bring those projects forward in a timely fashion and get those into design and then to the building commission for authority to construct. We do anticipate for the remainder of the 1921 capital budget process that we'll have a number of opportunities with the building commission to approve more projects. We have a meeting scheduled for the middle of October. We always try to have a meeting post-election in early December before it gets too close to Christmas. January is always a struggle because of a new legislature and everything. So don't know about January, but we'll try to do February because of the capital budget that I'll talk about here in a minute. The next capital budget has March sort of tied up, and then we might meet a couple more times in the spring, April, May, and maybe June before the end of fiscal 1920, the biennium 1921. As we look forward, because as it is in budgeting, as you are working through one capital budget, you always have to be prepared for the next one. And we have formally begun the process of working on the 21-23 capital budget. Agencies have submitted their capital budget request to us last week. And so we are in the process of compiling those. And so the process works like this. Staff in DFDM, which includes our budget analysts. We have 2 new budget analysts that have joined us, so we have a full complement of budget analysts. Our budget analysts, the Bureau of Architectural and Engineering staff, Sanjay, Naomi, and I will be working on reviewing the capital budget requests, working with our agencies to understand their priorities and begin internal briefings on those, briefing the leadership of DOA throughout the fall, briefing the governor's office into early winter, and then the governor will make some recommendations in February of 2021 to the building commission. We will brief the building commission members in February. There will be a meeting in March. because under statutory requirement, we must, we being the staff to the building commission, must help the building commission report on a capital budget by the first Tuesday in April of 2021, which I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I believe is April 5th of 2021. So you work your way backwards. In order to meet that goal, we have to have a building commission meeting in March of 2021. In order to have that, we have to have the governor make recommendations and release those in February of 2021, and work with the governor prior to that to solidify his recommendations. Now, on the heels of, as I said, either if not the largest capital budget, one of the largest capital budgets in state history, we don't know what the prospects are for the 2021-2023 capital budget. But what I will say is that we still have a lot of needs from our state agencies. We still have a great deal of backlog maintenance that we're going to have to be dealing with. Though we are also looking at the future of our capital assets in light of the public health emergency and what it has done potentially permanently to how we do business. And so we are beginning those conversations. The state of Wisconsin is no different than any other business in the country and frankly around the world that is looking at how we did business before COVID-19, how we're doing business today, and what business looks like in the future. I haven't coined this phrase, but I use it a lot. There's a new normal. We're studying what new normal means for our state agencies, and that will be part of this conversation when it comes to the 2021-2023 budget. I will say that in these uncertain economic times, a robust capital budget can assist all of you, but also the economy at large. There's at least a 2-to-1 economic multiplier when it comes to capital construction. So a $1 billion capital budget will put $2 billion of economic activity into the economy, and that supports a lot of jobs. So we're cognizant of that as we do our review. And we're also cognizant of the fact that we are at historic lows in our interest rates because of the situation in the economy. One of the advantages is our state debt rate is at historic lows. And so we can bond at a cheaper rate for the taxpayer in order to make any approved necessary capital improvements or capital maintenance projects that the legislature wants to approve. We are going to be able to bond those projects at a rate that's historically low and our debt service to taxpayers will be at historic lows going into the foreseeable future. So that's sort of a quick little conversation about the capital budget, a quick conversation with me. I realize we are going to try to keep things moving. We have a 9 o'clock session. So I'm going to stop my remarks there and give us a couple of minutes to answer any questions that come through on the system. Jake's going to help me. If you all have any questions, please feel free to ask anything that's on your mind, and I'll see if I can answer those. So I'll stop now and let you pose some questions through the website. And Lawrence, thank you very much for that nice note. We do, so one of the process improvements that we've made as a part of COVID is our, Jake talked to you about how we do virtual interviews for the AE projects for capital projects over $7.4 million. On the monthly AEs, those are those monthly AE selections that we do for projects under 7.4. We have gone to having most months 2 meetings a month to keep things moving. So that's another process improvement that we have been doing since COVID, is to make sure that we don't wait for 30 days like we used to in the old days. We don't wait anymore. If we have a decent slate of projects to put out for a selection, we get that out and start the clock and have a selection every 2 weeks. Now it burdens Audra and I, because we have to create the memos that go to the secretary, because remember, under ADM 20 secretary, Brennan is the actual selector of the architects and engineers. So we are pumping out a lot of memos to the secretary, but we're keeping those things moving as fast as we can. So again, thank you, Lawrence, for that nice note. As we look at capital projects, do we see a greater focus on renovation or remodeling of projects? It was a focus of Governor Evers in his first budget in 1921 to try to maximize the existing portfolio of facilities that we had. And I look for that to be a focus going forward as well. New construction only when the cost of new construction, the cost of renovation is exorbitantly high for the return that we get. We do come across times when the asset it's just not feasible or cost effective to renovate the asset. And there's a time for demolition and building new. So it's not a hard no, but we are going to probably focus on renovations going forward. I see that is anything else coming through, Jake? Because I see that we are at 9 o'clock and I do want to keep us moving.
Those are the only two questions, comments I saw coming through. So if we are wrapped up there, I think I'll turn it over to Aaron Gideon and we can transition to the next session here.
Okay, bye everybody. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, RJ. Thanks everyone that just presented. Great stuff there. We're bumping up at the 9 o'clock time, so we're just going to take a short break. Our next session is scheduled to start at 9:10 for small and large projects. So we'll go on mute. We'll come back at 9:10, and I guess I'll just say if anyone has any follow-up questions, still feel free to put them in the chat, and we can kind of address those over the break too. I would just ask if those that presented could just hang tight a little bit throughout the break, just in case some of those questions kind of trickle in. But otherwise, on break, and we'll see everyone back here at 9:10.
Welcome back. Is everyone here? All right. I'm Sharon Brunzer. I'm the Director of Account Management at Oracle Software Technologies, and we're going to get started with small and large projects. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or hold them for the question and answer at the end. Our speaker today is Audra Jervey, and she has been with the Capital Budget and Construction Administration for 5.5 years, of which the last 4 years she has been the contract officer. Audra coordinates the AE selection committee tasked with selecting architectural engineering and consulting services. She writes and processes architecture and engineering contracts and supports the construction contract processing team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Audra.
Good morning. This is Audra Jervey, and we're going to talk about the selection process for architects and engineers for small, monthly, and major state projects. So our objectives this morning are to understand the difference between the 3 types of projects, small, monthly, and major, understand how consulting firms are selected for each project type, and learn how to successfully win and deliver state work. For the purpose of AE selection, our 3 project types, small, monthly, and major, are determined based on their total project budget. So small projects are all projects with a total budget of up to $300,000. Monthly projects, which are sometimes referred to as all agency projects, are projects with a budget between $300,000 and $7.4 million. And then major projects are all projects with a total budget of more than $7.4 million. These thresholds are occasionally adjusted and were most recently increased in 2018. We're going to talk about all of this with more specificity in the coming slides, but here's just a general snapshot of the process for each project type. The selection process for small projects is via delegation, which means that the project manager and agency simply select a consultant. The duration for small projects is typically months, and small projects are rarely pre-planned. The selection process for monthly projects begins with a letter of interest submitted by a firm in response to a published service request that is written by the agency. The duration for monthly projects is anywhere from months to years, and they are sometimes pre-planned. Major projects begin with a qualification submission and a formal interview. They always take years, and the projects are always pre-planned. First and foremost, if you're interested in state work, you'll want to ensure that you have an active WisBuild account. WisBuild is our data management system, and you'll do any number of things within it, including responding to requests for information, uploading pay requests, etc. If you don't have an account, you can request one by emailing wisbuild@wisconsin.gov. You may also email me directly, and I can help you create an account. And we'll just need basic information like your company name, address, contact information, email, etc. Specific to architects and engineers is an AE data record. So your data record includes things like the number of staff at a particular office and what their disciplines are, the main contact people, your professional liability insurance, your fee rate sheet, particularly if you're interested in small projects, as well as any optional attachments, including things like resumes. In familiarizing yourself with WisBuild, a couple of things to understand are your firm's status points and evaluation scores. Status points are something that we use to better understand a firm's state workload. It's a number that is calculated based on the amount of your state contracts. It changes throughout the course of a project based on the stage of the project. Evaluation scores are review scores that are given by our DFDM staff at different stages throughout the project. If you have any questions about where to find these within WisBuild, how exactly they're calculated, why they are what they are, etc., please ask. We're always more than happy to answer questions about status points or evaluation scores. We'd also ask that you'd familiarize yourself with the policy and procedure manual. This can be found on our website. We'd also ask that you familiarize yourself with SharePoint. This is our file share site. This is what you would use if you were to upload bidding or construction documents, for instance. What I can't emphasize enough is if you have questions with WisBuild or SharePoint as well, please ask. I'll be the first to admit that it's not the easiest site to use, especially for new users. It's got some nuances, it's got some quirks, but I'm more than happy to answer questions that you have, whether they're project specific or just technical or login, for instance. WisBuild also has a help desk feature, so if you had a question and you're at least able to get into WisBuild, you can submit a question via its help desk. So you've created your WisBuild account and you've established your AE data record, and now you're all jazzed about getting state work. Where do you go? The best place to start is our website. Down here on the bottom of the slide is the exact web page for our AE selection page. And you can see a snap from here, the 3 project types. Small projects are not solicited via the website, but you can find out more information about the small projects program. Monthly selection projects are posted to the website. They're posted in groups or batches. It can be just a small handful of projects or upwards of 15 to 20 projects. They're posted in batches typically once a month, hence the name. Every now and then we post them more frequently, but most often it's just once a month. And approximately the third Friday of the month is when they would be posted. That varies a little bit, but typically the third Friday of the month. And major projects as well can be found posted to our website. They're not posted with any regularity, but on average about one new project per month gets posted. A question that I get asked quite frequently is whether or not we have any type of alert or notification system that you could subscribe to so that you would receive an email when projects are posted. Unfortunately, we do not have anything like that. So the best advice I can give you is to just check the website regularly. All right, let's talk about each of the 3 project types in more detail, beginning with small projects. So again, small projects have a total project budget of less than $300,000. They are often more simple projects, including things like maintenance, health and safety, environmental protection, etc. The agency may be granted delegated authority for specific parts of the project, including bidding, contracting, and on-site construction supervision. And though they are small projects, design services performed by an AE are still subject to the same design standards as larger projects. So again, the small project selection process is via delegation, meaning that the agency representative and the DFDM project manager choose a consultant, and they take several things into consideration when making this selection. They may be chosen based on their prior experience with the agency or with DFDM. Location plays a big part in the selection for small projects. So for instance, if there's an emergency generator in Milwaukee that needs repairs and you're based in Rhinelander, it's not likely that you would be selected for that small project. Bios or resumes or other information uploaded to your data record in WISBuild may also be taken into consideration, as well as fee rate sheets. So though all selections are qualification based, your fee rate sheet may be taken into account specifically for small projects since they have a much lower budget threshold. Small projects are also awarded to one single firm. You're not required to team with anyone. So let's say you're new and you're interested in getting your foot in the door with DFDM. How do you make yourself known? We'd recommend that you contact facility staff at agencies and campuses, as well as contact DFDM staff in your area of expertise or in your neck of the woods in Wisconsin. I know that can be tricky. You might not know how to contact them, who to contact. I'm happy to help. So if you want to contact me, I will help make an introduction. Some common project types for small projects include programming, studies, investigations, environmental projects and inspections, health, safety, or time-sensitive projects, emergency repairs and maintenance, as well as AE on call for a specific agency or UW campus. Here again is the webpage for the small projects program. So to reiterate, the design standards for a consultant are the same as a larger project, but the bidding process is a little bit different. So if you'd like to read more about that, head to our website. So let's say we have a small roof repair project and the project manager contacts you as the consultant and asks if you're interested and available for the job. And you say yes. What happens next? First, you'll receive an email that notifies you of selection. That email will ask that you log into the WISBuild project page to review the official notification letter. That letter will ask that you schedule a kickoff meeting with the agency and project manager. At that meeting, you will better define the project scope, schedule, and budget. You will then submit a proposal to the project manager, which gets turned into a request for a contract. And then you wait. In the past, you would have received an email with the contract asking you to print, sign, and return a hard copy. I'm happy to say that given our current circumstances, we have been using DocuSign for electronic contract signing. If you haven't used this yet, I think you'll find that it's much easier and much faster. You will sign it electronically. It then gets returned to us. It gets signed on our end electronically, and then you'll receive via email a copy of the fully executed contract, which acts as your notice to proceed. So let's move on to monthly projects. So again, monthly projects have a budget between $300,000 and $7.4 million. That's a huge range, so you're going to get a huge variety of project types, anything from a vault toilet replacement at a state park to a residence hall renovation at a UW campus. Projects are typically posted once a month. They are often posted the third Friday of the month, and the selection committee meets once a month to select for that batch of projects. It's usually the first or the last Thursday of the month. So projects get posted on a Friday afternoon. Consultants then have the entire next week to review the projects, determine if they're interested in any. And then the following week, the selection committee will meet to make recommendations. I wish I could be more specific on the days and dates, but the best advice I can give is just to check the website at least once a week. Monday is a great time to check for new projects. The selection committee is made up of 5 DFDM staff with a minimum of 3 licensed professionals, and then up to 2 agency representatives per project. The selection process for monthly projects is via a letter of interest. So if you're reviewing the website and you see a project out for solicitation that's in your wheelhouse, the way that you indicate interest is by submitting a letter, and this is uploaded via WisBuild. In that letter, you'll want to show us that you understand the project. You're more than welcome to contact the agency or project manager for project clarification. Their contact information is very often found within the service request document. You'll want to clearly demonstrate your understanding of the project in your letter and summarize how your firm's or team's experience aligns with the project needs. Specifically, some things to include would be examples of comparable projects, size, location, cost, etc., your team's experience or specific expertise. So unlike small projects, which are very often awarded to one firm, monthly projects may have a teaming of firms with one prime architect or engineer. You'll also want to include familiarity with the agency, institution, or municipality if you have it, as well as past work experience with DFDM. Some things to avoid in your letter of interest would be generic letters, especially for several projects on the same agenda. So if you're submitting for more than one project per month, remember to change more than just the title in your letter. Make sure it's specifically tailored to the project that you were interested in. You'll want to avoid listing clients and projects with no reference to the work performed. And then you'll want to avoid fluff. So don't add a lot of extraneous information just to fill pages. As far as formatting, please use clear text and graphics. You may address the letter to the selection committee. And a very common question we get is, what is the page limit for letters of interest? We don't have a page limit, but I would highly recommend you limit it to 10 pages. Anywhere from 4 to 8 is really ideal. There may every now and then be a specific project that necessitates more pages, but the shorter the better. Keep in mind that agency representatives and project managers may need to read a dozen or more letters for a specific project. So you want to make sure that you're not submitting something that's just too long. In uploading your letter of interest, you'll first and foremost want that WisBuild account, as the letters of interest are uploaded via WisBuild. You'll want to upload your letter as a PDF and upload it on time. Letters of interest are almost always due at noon on a Monday, and the website will specify that. So the projects are posted to the website a Friday afternoon. You then have the next week to review the projects and determine if you're interested in them. And then that next Monday is when your letters would need to be uploaded. And we'd ask that you not use unusual or special characters in the file name, as WISBuild is just a little bit persnickety about those. After you submit your letters of interest, how are you being evaluated? The agency representatives for a project, the DFDM project manager, and any other pertinent DFDM staff will review the letters and determine if you're suited for the job. They'll also review your status points to see what your current DFDM workload is. They'll review your evaluation scores to see how you've performed on past state work. And they'll also look at your location. So are you located close to the project site? Is it important for a particular project if you're located close? It may be or it may not be. The next step is the selection committee holds a meeting. At that meeting, they review all of the recommendations from the agency representatives and project managers, and they make a recommendation for a number 1 firm and a number 2 firm. Those recommendations are sent to the Department of Administration secretary, who makes the final approval. Selected firms are notified via email of their selection, typically within about 3 weeks of that selection meeting. Non-selected firms are not notified individually and will need to just check our website for the results. So let's say you're awarded the project. Just like the small projects, you'll receive an email that directs you to the WISBuild project page and asks that you read the notification letter. That letter will ask that you schedule a kickoff meeting with the agency and project manager. At that meeting, you'll want to fully determine the project scope, schedule, and budget. And then you'll submit your proposal to the project manager, who will then request a contract. And then you wait for your contract. And again, just like the small projects, your contract will be sent via DocuSign for electronic signing. If you did not receive a project and you're curious as to why, you're welcome to contact me, and I can sometimes give you a little bit of feedback as to why you weren't selected for a particular project, or offer you some advice to better improve your chances in the future. Lastly, let's talk about major projects. So again, major projects are all projects with a total budget of more than $7.4 million. So this would be something like a new building or a large renovation. These are always pre-planned and can be found in the biennial budgets. If you were to review these budget documents on our website, for instance, you could get a sense of the projects that are coming down the pipeline over the next couple of years. The agency prepares a request for services document as well as some supplemental information, and this gets uploaded to our website for solicitation. If you're interested in a major project, you'll first need to determine the role you're interested in playing. Are you interested in being the prime architect or engineer, an associated firm, or a subconsultant? You'll also need to understand and meet the qualification requirements. These are defined by our administrative code. This link down here will take you to the webpage if you're interested in reading the whole thing. And this requires, among other things, that you have more than one architect or engineer as a responsible member of the firm, that you have been in business for more than 3 years, and that you have a permanent office within Wisconsin where responsible direction of all services will be based. You must also meet the project definition. So for instance, if this project is a residence hall remodel, you need to have completed a residence hall remodel, and that remodel needs to have been half the size or half the construction cost of this proposed major project. If you don't meet those requirements, but you're still interested in this project, you could serve as a subconsultant, or you could form an association with a firm that does meet those qualification requirements. It's worth noting that this is the case for all projects with a budget of more than $1 million. So you'll see monthly projects that also require that these qualification requirements be met. In order to indicate your interest in a major project, you would complete a qualification submittal. We upload a template of this document with the supplemental information to our solicitation webpage. You'll have about 4 weeks to complete this document. And as you're completing it, you'll want to identify your team. Most importantly, you want to assemble a strong team and identify the primes and the subconsultants. And you'll want to highlight your experience and your related completed projects. This is essentially a more detailed letter of interest. It's really important that you read and understand the qualification solicitation document. And if you have any questions regarding how to fill it out, please ask. You're also more than welcome to ask whether or not the project that you are proposing as your qualifying project meets the requirements. So I can answer that question for you before you submit it. So a couple more notes on this qualification submittal. Currently, you only have to upload this via WisBuild. You do not need to submit a hard copy. In the past that was requested, but for now we just need an uploaded electronic copy. We'd ask that you limit excessive text as you're completing the document. This is the same reasoning as the monthly letters of interest. It's already a long, wordy document, and we often have to review many of them, so just avoid any fluff or extraneous information. The state sets goals for minority participation, so we ask that when you're completing the document, you indicate who on your team is a minority business enterprise or a disabled veteran business. You can confirm which teams are by going to the Wisconsin Supplier Diversity webpage here and just making sure that they're certified with the state. Unfortunately, women-owned businesses do not currently qualify. So while it's great to have a woman-owned business on your team, it doesn't count towards the participation goal numbers. I'll also stress that those are just goals, so you're not required to meet a minimum percentage of minority participation. And then lastly, I'll just reiterate to read the instructions in completing this qualification submittal and only fill out what is required. And of course, please, please, please ask questions if anything is unclear. After the deadline for qualification submissions has passed, the evaluation process begins. You are evaluated by the selection committee, which again is 5 DFDM staff, 3 of which are licensed professionals, 1 of which is the project manager for the project, and then 2 agency representatives. They'll begin reviewing the submissions, and once it's determined that the minimum project requirements have been met, they'll begin to screen you based on the strength of your team, which includes the key people to work on the project, your record of similar past projects completed, and the overall experience of the AE team. You'll be evaluated on your evaluation scores. These are stored within WisBuild. It's worth noting that these have a 5-year sunset. So if 5 years ago you were reviewed on a project, either really highly or maybe a little bit low, these will drop off after 5 years. You'll be evaluated on the distance from the project site, and this is the distance of the prime AE from the project site. And you'll also be evaluated on your existing status points or your state workload. All of this information gets compiled into a screening form document, which the selection committee uses to help determine who should move on or who is most qualified to move on to an interview. It's important to review these criteria before you submit your qualification, especially your evaluation scores and your existing status points. If you have any questions about these, please reach out to us. We can often accommodate requests or changes or just offer some clarification as to why those numbers are what they are. It's also important to understand how forming an association with another firm affects these numbers. And again, if you have any questions about this, please, please, please reach out to me prior to submitting your qualification. After the screening and evaluation process, the next step is formal interviews. So typically 3 to 4 firms are invited to interview for a particular project. It's never more than 4 firms. Firms are notified via email that they have been shortlisted or invited to interview. Firms that are not shortlisted are not notified individually. And just like with the monthly projects, would need to check the website for the results. If you have any questions about being shortlisted or not being shortlisted, please ask. We can provide you with a summary of the screening materials so you can get a sense of maybe the categories that you scored particularly well in, or maybe the areas where the score was a little bit lower than you would have liked. We could also set up a virtual meeting if you want even more information than that screening summary can provide. The next steps would be to attend the project walkthrough. This is hosted by the agency at the project site. Recently, we have done a couple of these virtually as well. At that walkthrough or site briefing, you'll want to use that opportunity to ask the agency and the project manager as many questions as you can to make sure that you have a full understanding of the project. From the time that you are notified that you've been invited to interview until the interview date, you have about 4 weeks. So in that time period, you would have attended the walkthrough and asked all of your clarifying questions and then prepared for your presentation. In the past, you would have come down to DOA in person and presented in a conference room. The past couple of months, we have been doing virtual interviews, specifically with Microsoft Teams. And I have to tell you, I'm incredibly impressed with how well these are going. If you haven't interviewed yet, I think you'll find that it's really a fairly easy process and, dare I say, enjoyable process to do them virtually. A couple of things to keep in mind during your interview. First and foremost, manage your time. So with these virtual interviews, we have 60-minute presentations followed by 15 minutes for questions and answers. So make sure you're keeping that presentation within that 60-minute time period. Format your presentation to follow the committee-provided questions. So prior to your walkthrough or very shortly after, you will have received a set of interview questions. These are the questions that the selection committee is looking to be answered during your presentation. I suggest you follow those questions fairly closely to the order that they're provided. It just makes it a lot easier to make sure that you're answering all those questions. We also ask that you bring representatives of various disciplines. That allows them to participate in the presentation and be available for discipline-specific questions. We are currently limiting participants on Microsoft Teams interviews to 10, so this might be a little bit trickier than it was in the past, but do your best to make sure that folks are in your interview that can answer any question that might be posed by the selection committee. So during the interviews, what is the selection committee looking for? They're watching to see that you are focusing on the project. It should be abundantly clear that you are speaking specifically about this project and that you understand its requirements. They're looking at your team chemistry. This is a little bit more nuanced with virtual interviews, but you can still get a sense of how well your team is gelling. They'll want you to highlight how your experience makes you the best candidate for the project. And this isn't bulleted here, but they'll also want to make sure that you're responding to those provided interview questions. Some things to avoid would be long team introductions. It's important to introduce your team, but don't let it eat too much into your precious presentation time. You'll also want to avoid focusing on final solutions or designs. The selection committee wants to see that you're thinking critically, not that you're coming up with final solutions. You'll also want to avoid difficult to read or see graphics. This has improved quite a bit with the virtual interviews since everyone can view your slideshow on their individual screens, but still keep that in mind. And then lastly, avoid presenting incomplete projects at length. So if you've got a project that's similar to the project you're interviewing for, but it's not complete, it doesn't give the selection committee sort of a great sense of your success during that project. So what's next? After the interview process, the selection committee makes a recommendation for a number 1 firm and number 2 firm. These recommendations are sent to the DOA secretary who makes the final selection. This process typically takes about 3 to 4 weeks. All firms are notified of the results. Notifications are via phone call. So whether you're selected or not selected, you'll get a phone call from me. It's always going to be awkward. It's always going to be awful. I dislike it, but I greatly appreciate everyone being understanding and professional. I often can't provide a lot of feedback right then, but we do want to give you feedback on how well you did during the interviews. So in the past, we would have, again, made you come down to DOA and review the selection committee comments in person. At least for now, maybe going forward, we are able to email you a summary of the selection comments so that you can get a better idea of what the agency and what DFDM had to say about the interview. If after reviewing those interview comments you still have questions, you can contact the agency or we can put you in contact with a specific selection committee member or the project manager. So if you were awarded the project, you will receive an official notification letter via email from me. That letter will ask that you schedule a kickoff meeting with the agency and project manager. At that meeting, you'll want to determine your project scope, schedule, and budget, and then you'll submit a proposal to the project manager. They will then request a contract. And just like with the small projects and the monthly projects, then you'll wait. Your contract will be sent for electronic signing via DocuSign. Major projects sometimes take a little bit longer for contract execution because given the contract amounts, they require governor approval and signature as well. So now that we've summarized the selection process for small, monthly, and major projects, let's talk a little bit about how to strategize and pursue state work. Most importantly, be persistent and set realistic expectations. So don't expect that the first time you ever submit a letter of interest for a monthly project, you'll be selected. But do expect that if you're persistent and you continue to submit letters of interest and you let it be known that you're interested in state work and you follow up with DFDM, that you will eventually be selected. The DFDM leadership is very interested in spreading the work around, in awarding state work to all firms that are interested in state work. So please be persistent and know that it will eventually pay off. Get to know the DFDM project managers in your area of expertise. I know this can be a little bit tricky, but I'm again happy to help make introductions. So if you're interested in roofing projects or in civil engineering projects, just reach out to me and we'll help put you in touch with the appropriate project managers. Understand your strengths and your weaknesses. It's also helpful to get to know the agencies and institutions. Specifically, if you're located in a part of the state that has a state agency or institution, maybe your office is in Eau Claire and you're interested in doing state work on the campus there, learn what is important to them. They always know what projects are coming before we at DFDM know, so it's helpful to get to know them. Also know what problems they might have had in the past, and then you can avoid those. So if you're selected for a state project and you've completed it and you said, gee, that was a super swell time, I would love to do it again, how do you get more state work? Most importantly, perform well on projects. I know that's easy to say, but do a good job, do what's asked of you, do it on time, and do it thoroughly. Express interest, so continue to submit those letters of interest for monthly projects, submit your qualification submittals for major projects, or reach out to DFDM and let them know that you are interested in being considered for small projects. Be proactive in addressing concerns while you are working on state projects. Communication is incredibly important to how successful you're going to be while working on a state project. Build confidence and familiarity with DFDM and with the agencies and facilities. And also monitor your evaluation scores and your status points within WISBuild and reach out if you have any concerns about those. Thank you. That about sums it up. If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if you have any questions in the coming days or weeks or months, please feel free to send me an email and I'd be happy to answer those as well. Thank you.
So Audra, we do have a question in the question and answers. Are you able to release what program is being looked at?
Yeah, I think I just need a little more specific about what they mean by what program is being looked at. Oh, I unfortunately am not super familiar with what is being looked at. If someone else wants to chime in, but I'm a little bit removed from that process.
Hi, this is Kevin. At this time, because of where it's at in procurement, we're not able to discuss it.
Audra, we also have a question in the chat from Fred Grove.
Yeah. As far as the receiving feedback, he asks if we can email interview panelists. You are welcome to contact the panelists or the selection committee members. They're going to give you feedback based on their experience and their opinions. So they'll share with you specifically what they thought, and of course will not share what the other selection committee members thought. And as far as this evaluated for structural projects, I'm not quite sure. Again, maybe Kevin can chime in.
Yep. Oh, hey, Audra, this is Kevin.
Yeah.
And Fred, to your question, due to staffing levels, specifically with structural knowledge, we've struggled because we just haven't had a large structural staff at BAE. And at this time right now, we only have one structural engineer on staff, and that's Tim Luttrell. And he and I do look at some stuff, but it's very difficult at this time to provide actual comments. What we're thinking about in the future is maybe doing some sit-down page turns with staff to come up with or AEs to come up with comments as a way to alleviate the actual written review comments.
Thanks, Kevin. So a question about the status point system. So status points, it's this calculation process based on the amount of your contract. So briefly, for each $100,000 contract, you would receive one status point. That then gets reduced by 80% once the project reaches the construction stage. And then what is the point relationship between prime AEs and their partnering firms? So for a major project, if you were to submit an association, the status points, I'll first say that typically only one firm has status points because very often another firm is from out of state and has never worked on a Wisconsin state project. So very often only the in-state Wisconsin firm has status points, and those are the points that are used. If you're if you're teaming with another firm in Wisconsin, whomever has the highest status points are the points that are used. As far as evaluation scores, if you're partnering with another firm, what happens is the points get averaged. So let's say you're evaluated and you have a 75% score, and the other firm is also 75, the resulting number is 75. Again, very often, since those partnering firms are from out of state, they don't have evaluation scores. If a firm does not have an evaluation score, they get an average of 50, just a general 50. So if you have an evaluation score of 100, the firm you're partnering with has no score and therefore has a 50, then those would be averaged and it would result in a 75. Anything else? Are consultant scores not associated firms accounted for as well? That's a great question. For major projects in the screening process, consultant scores are not considered. They could be, I'll say they're not accounted for. They could be considered. The selection committee could review their scores, but it is not part of that official screening form. Our status points rounded to the nearest whole number. Their decimal points are used, so we typically use as far as 1 decimal. And then there's a question for a repost of my contact information. So it's just first name dot last name at wisconsin.gov. So that's audra.jervey, AUDRA. .jervey, and that's at wisconsin.gov. I'll take it. Well, that looks like it's about it. If you have anything, again, in the later this afternoon or the coming days. Oh, here's one more. Is it a disadvantage? It's not a disadvantage, but it can potentially lower those evaluation scores a little bit. But in many cases, a project that requires you to team with an out-of-state firm also requires other firms to team with an out-of-state firm. So very often, many teams, sometimes even all of the teams for a project are teaming with a firm that has no evaluation score, so it kind of evens out in those cases. And then when are status points applied? So it's at the time prior to interview. So when you submit a qualification for the project, they would be considered at that initial screening process. At the time of interview, as far as the selection committee is really looking at that interview. They're not considering your status points or your evaluation scores at that point. So it's just at that initial screening stage. Anything else?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, please try, if you want to have any questions added, they will try to answer them throughout the conference. We're now going to take a short break and stay logged in to join us or join us again at 10:20 for technology use in projects. Thank you.
All right, I would like to introduce our next speaker, and we're going to break this up into 2 sessions. The first session is going to be with Dan Swartz, and he is going to talk about unmanned aircraft system. Dan has a diverse range of skills, including civil site design, land surveying, and unmanned aircraft system called UAS, surveying and mapping. He focuses on developing new workflows utilizing UAS technology to add efficiency and value to complex projects. And he has overseen and or conducted over 700 UAS operations across the country. Dan is with Ruckert Milke. And just so you know, I would like you to, if possible, hold your questions at the end of his presentation. He has about a 20 or 25 minute presentation and then 5 minutes for questions. And then we'll get on with talking about GIS with John. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dan Swartz. Dan?
Awesome. Thank you very much. So yeah, today I'll be presenting on leveraging drone technology focused on facilities. And thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I've been working with drones now for the past 5 years, about everything from, small, 1 to 5 acre development sites all the way up to leading the drone efforts at the Foxconn project down in Racine. Also a FAA licensed private pilot and remote pilot as well. So really quick, just about Rickert Milkie. We are a full service civil engineering firm and survey firm with offices across the state. These are some of our services that we provide. And obviously today's presentation is going to be focused on developing and advancing technological solutions for our clients' problems, and in this case, specifically drones. Quick look at our agenda. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to be going kind of fast. So yeah, definitely hit me up with questions afterwards. We'll focus first on just a quick overview of the systems that are being used right now, the airspace integration and current regulations, and then we'll get into the meat of the applications and uses of the tech and how to integrate it and share it with GIS. So first, we'll look at the unmanned aircraft systems themselves, or drones in this case. The first system, and probably the most common that people are aware of, are these multi-rotor systems. They're obviously controlled by multiple motors, vertically oriented, so they can vertically take off and land. They're stable, safe, easy to control. And one of the biggest benefits is that they can hover in place. So if you have some kind of unexpected situation at your site, you can actually let go of the sticks. These are all GPS stabilized, so they can fly in winds upwards of 20 to 25 miles an hour. And if you have a problem, you can actually just let go of the sticks and the drone will maintain its position in space, depending on the site conditions, which will let whatever is happening, be, you can resolve the situation. The other really beneficial thing about working with multi-rotor systems is that when you're doing any kind of survey and mapping projects, you can keep the drone within the project limits, which is especially beneficial in urban environments or places where you don't want to overfly the neighboring properties. And so that's a huge benefit of the multi-rotor systems. The other big category is the fixed wing systems. So this is more of just like a traditional airplane or a remote controlled airplane kind of device. It uses fixed wing and some kind of propulsion system to produce lift, which requires higher forward speeds to stay aloft. I would say the most difficult part of these is launching them and landing them, as most of them need to be either hand thrown or catapulted and then belly landed. So obviously you need a lot more space to use these drones and to safely recover them. The other big, risk with using these, I would say, is that they can't hover in place. So they obviously need to maintain forward speed to keep flying. So most of them have some kind of orbit feature where you can pause them at some point along a mapping flight, and they can hover, or not hover, they can orbit, but they're still moving, and it still is just riskier in the event of some unexpected situation on the site. The big benefit of using these systems is that they can generally cover more area than a multi-rotor aircraft in the same amount of time. And this is just due to the nature of them. They're obviously moving faster and they're more efficient with batteries power because of that lift generated by the wings. So they can cover, hundreds of acres in an hour flight, and most of them have longer flight times than the traditional or the typical multi-rotor, which I should have mentioned. The typical multi-rotor flight times is around 20 to 35 minutes, and some of these fixed wing systems are getting closer to an hour of actual flight time. And really quick, just touch on kind of these new hybrid systems that are starting to emerge. They're basically a combination of the multi-rotor and a fixed wing drone. They have the ability to take off and land vertically with just the thrust from the motors, but then once they're up in the air, they can actually fly like a fixed wing. So you kind of get the benefits of both worlds there. Like I was saying, you have the ability to pause and hover in place if you have some kind of unexpected situation on the site, but you can also have the efficiency and speed of the fixed wing. The one negative I would still say of this system is that, like the traditional fixed wing drones, you need to fly outside the project limits in order to capture good data within the project area. And this is kind of, if you imagine like mowing the lawn and you have to do passes back and forth, whereas a fixed wing can stay directly over the project, whereas a multi-rotor, can stay directly over the project area. The fixed wing actually has to fly outside of the project area and to give itself room to turn around and have a nice flight line back over the project area. And I'll kind of be explaining or be showing pictures of how these mapping flights look. So this will probably make more sense here in a second. That's just a quick overview of the systems that are currently being used today. Also go into a really quick overview of the current regulations. There's been a lot of, I guess, development in this as the FAA, quickly had to integrate all these drones into the airspace system. And this kind of started to occur around 2015. Since 2016, we've had the regulations that are posted in 14 CFR Part 107. So that's where you hear all the drone operators talking about being Part 107 certified. The FAA actually created a new class of pilot called remote pilot to basically allow you to fly drones commercially. The main rules that we've had to be in line with since these Part 107 regulations came out is the drone has to be within visual line of sight of the pilot in command or the person manipulating the flight controls. So that's a big one. It limits you to only daylight operations. The other big one is that you can't operate over unprotected pedestrians. So if they're in a building or in a parked car or under some kind of structure, you can fly over them, but just like flying over a crowd at a concert or something, or flying over pedestrians in a park would be illegal. And the law specifically states that it's directly over the pedestrian. So I guess that kind of gives you some leeway as to what that means. But basically they're trying to avoid you flying over large crowded areas. The other big one is that the max altitude of the drone is limited to 400 feet AGL. A lot of people also have a misconception that you can't fly within 5 miles of any airport. That's another area where the FAA has been doing a lot of development, I guess, of the regulations to safely allow drone flights closer and closer to the airports. As you can see on the right here, they actually have now UAS facility maps that have ceiling altitudes listed there. So if you're flying within a grid, within controlled airspace around these larger airports, this would be like Mitchell, Madison, Timmerman, Green Bay, any of these larger airports, there's this grid of maximum altitudes that is based off the approaches to and from runways. So as long as you're flying below that altitude, you can get an instant approval from the FAA through an app on your phone, which will allow you to legally conduct that flight and do it safely. So that was a huge development in flying drones around these larger controlled airports. Any of the smaller airports, which there are a lot of, you don't have to have any kind of authorization to fly near those airports, just due to the lower classification of that airspace and just the less busy nature of those airports. In those situations, it's the remote operator's responsibility to see and avoid any kind of manned aircraft flights. Any operations outside of these parameters that I've kind of listed out do require project-specific waivers or authorizations, which can be usually attained in like a 1 to 3 week window prior to the flight through an online portal with the FAA. And the FAA is kind of the next steps in developing these regulations is going to be mostly focused, I think, on beyond visual line of sight and simultaneous control of multiple aircraft. So I would say that the drones, the current, I guess, landscape of drone use has been integrated pretty safely into the airspace system. So now they're looking at expanding the current regulations to allow us to fully take advantage of the real capabilities of these drones. I mean, most of them have ranges of over 5 miles even in open environments, and that's far beyond visual line of sight. So they're going to be hopefully developing these regulations further to allow full use of the technology. So that was really, really quick look into just where the technology is at right now and where the regulations are at. So now we'll get into the applications and uses of the drone tech. And I tried to tailor this more towards the facilities world, obviously. A lot of different uses for drones, and there's more being developed every day, it seems like, but these are kind of some of the main uses for this application. So just to give you a brief overview of where we're going to be going here, we'll be talking about the kind of starting with the more basic uses of the drone and then going more and more advanced towards the survey side of things. So the first uses of the drones that most people think of is just manual flying for marketing, inspection type photos. And then we can also use other sensors to get infrared photos to monitor heat loss and stuff from buildings. Then getting more advanced, you can generate ortho photos, point clouds, and digital terrain models. And this is going to be more of the autopilot type flying where you're actually using a controller and a flight app to automatically and autonomously fly the drone in a way that will allow you to create high resolution aerial maps. You can get topographic and planimetric data so that you can do 3D modeling of sites and create survey grade deliverables with accuracies less than 1 inch. Finally, we'll talk then about kind of a new sensor technology called multispectral and what we can do with multispectral mapping with regards to vegetation health maps. So just going to start out here kind of going through some photos. This is just a nice example of a marketing photo that I took up at a small town in Door County. This is another example of, I guess it could be a marketing photo, could also be used as an inspection photo, because once we start zooming in on these photos, you can actually see the quality of the photo. And obviously when you're flying a drone around these structures, you can get very close. You can do it very safely and very quickly rather than harnessing up people to get up in these towers or other more dangerous or less accessible areas. We can very quickly fly the drone and collect really high resolution imagery of these facilities. Another example would be this fire tower structure in the village of Thiensville. So we got some marketing photos of it, and then also very quickly we were able to do a facade inspection of the tower using the drone. And again, to do all the faces of this tower and the roof of the building was probably a 10-minute drone flight. We've also done similar things like this on very large structures such as Miller Park in Milwaukee, where we actually flew the entire facade and the roof trusses. And again, compared to the time and cost of harnessing up people to get up in these more dangerous environments, you know, the drone just obviously blows that out of the water time and money wise. Another really applicable use for this, especially lately, has been erosion inspections along our lakeshore. We've obviously have high water levels and causing a lot of properties, a lot of erosion problems. So using the drone, we can safely get out over the water, get very close to these eroding shoreline and eroding structures and document their conditions to enable, you know, better engineering and design planning to remedy these problems. Another obvious use would be to monitor construction progress. This is a water tower down in Mount Pleasant, just a couple of quick snapshots there. So we can use that for marketing. We can obviously get closer, zoom in on these photos and use it kind of to document the construction progress and inspect the tower itself. And then finally, here's some examples of heat loss mapping with a thermal sensor on the drone. So this is again, manual flying and mapping with the drone to monitor heat loss of a building. So you can, you know, either find deteriorated insulation and roofing or wet spots or things like that thermal cameras can pick up. So that's, oh, and one more thing here that is actually kind of interesting. We've started to use the drones, it's come up several times now, to map SCADA radio antenna locations around municipalities. And a lot of these antennas were installed, you know, tens of years ago, and now the vegetation has grown and they don't have direct sight lines to the next antenna in the series. So they're having problems with losses in their SCADA networks. And so using the drone, we can actually very quickly go to these antenna locations and just visually see when, in this case, when you can see the next tower in the series, see what altitude you're at, and then kind of get an idea of what, if you were to replace the antenna, what height you would want to put that antenna at to get a clear view to the next antenna in the series. So much cheaper and faster than doing a radio survey. So next here, we'll start to get into more of the technical side of the drone's usage, and this would be the photogrammetric mapping. This is again now using automated flight control apps that basically put the drone in autopilot. So you can kind of see here in the video playing on the right, the drones can be flying basically a lawnmower pattern over sites, you know, as large as hundreds to thousands of acres, collecting geotagged photos, and from that we can create these aerial site maps or an orthophoto. Basically means that it's a scaled, measurable photo or map of an entire site, and it's in real-world survey coordinates that it will overlay with your other survey work or your designs perfectly. Depending on the altitude of these flights, you can get resolutions, as high as 1/2 inch per pixel. I would say 3/4 inch per pixel is pretty standard for a normal altitude for a mapping flight. And you can see XY accuracy is less than 1/10 of a foot. From these same flights, you're not only going to get this orthorectified site map, but you're also going to get topographic contour data. So this is going to be your contour surface, your tint surface in CAD. The Z accuracy of that depends pretty drastically on the terrain that you're mapping. So hardscapes like pavements and bare earth, you can pretty easily get sub 1/10 of a foot accuracy. As you move into more vegetated terrain, the drone can only really map and get elevations on what is showing up in the photos. So if you have tall grass and then tree canopies, obviously your vertical accuracy is going to be less and less. And over densely forested areas, you really can't use photogrammetry to get accurate contour data up the ground, unless you're flying during the leaf-off conditions, which we're going to be coming into here, fall through winter and into spring. You can actually get really good topographic data in forested areas when the leaves are off, because you can see the ground in the photos. So the topographic information is highly dependent on the terrain. And as I mentioned earlier, with typical multi-rotor systems that I'm most familiar with, the efficiency is up to 75 acres in about a 20-minute mapping flight. And with 4 batteries and chargers, you can basically have continuous runtime. So I think flown 2,000 acres in about 12 hours just by continuously flying and charging batteries. So you can get really, really efficient with this mapping technology. This is a quick example of what the geotagged photo grid that's collected from one of these autonomous mapping flights looks like once you're in the processing software. And here is then, I'm just trying to show, I guess, how the software is actually working. Most people just think that when you're taking these photos of the sites, you're getting a 2D site map, which you certainly get. That's that orthophoto I was talking about. But you're also getting a full 3D model and point cloud of the site, which is where you get the contour data generated from. And this is done by actually triangulating matching pixels in any overlapping photo. So as you can kind of see here, this ground control point that I've selected on the surface there is visible in 12 photos in this case. And because each of the photos is geotagged to sub 1 inch accuracy by the GPS system on board the drone itself, you can actually then triangulate the location of that common pixel from those geotagged photos and get an XYZ coordinate of that pixel, which is how a point cloud is then built of your site. And then, like I said, from that point cloud, you're going to get, basically a full accurate survey grade 3D representation of the site, from which you can generate contours. You can extract line work, the locations of objects on the site, like building corners, all that kind of stuff. So you're basically able to do a full 3D survey and get a survey grade aerial map from a single drone flight with a photogrammetric sensor. So here's an example of what that orthophoto that was generated from that last 3D point cloud example would look like. And here is the contours that were generated from that point cloud as well, overlaid on that photo. Again, all of this is in real world survey coordinates that can match your design or your existing survey information. So this can be imported directly into CAD and it'll line up with all your existing line work and survey information, which is awesome. And that's what we're doing with this technology 90% of the time. Again, if we zoom in on the circled area, this is the full zoomed in quality of that ortho photo. Hard to show everything here just in a PowerPoint, but obviously you can pan and zoom freely within the photo, and that is your full zoom quality of that photo. This is an example of another wastewater treatment plant up in Marionette that was flown as part of a environmental project up there. And the main purpose of this wasn't necessarily getting the ortho or the topographic data, but we were mostly actually mapping the utilities so that they could design a soil boring plan at the site. So as you see here, this is the overall map of the site that was created from that autonomous drone flight. I think this was like 30 acres or so total. Took about, I don't know, 15 minutes in the air with the drone. And then if we zoom in this part of the ortho photo, you can actually zoom in all the way, as you can see here, and see those paint marks from the utility locate. So then from this, you could either just design your boring plan to avoid any of these utilities, or you can actually then even take it a step farther and start extracting these lines in CAD, basically tracing the utilities in CAD to get a more traditional looking utility survey from the drone data. And you can do this with anything, with any of the planometrics that you see in the photo, because this photo is orthorectified and survey grade, meaning it's accurate to sub 10th of a foot. Anything that you can see here can be traced or extracted in CAD and then can generate a traditional looking survey map. So keep moving forward here. And then finally, taking this the next step further, we can clean up that point cloud and create a 3D mesh of the site. And this was then used to share with the client, I guess, the locations of the borings and to make sure that the equipment could fit through any of these narrow spaces in this on this facility. And again, so this point cloud or this mesh that we're looking at here is again accurate to basically 1/10 of a foot and is coordinately correct. So it just becomes a really valuable model. Again, from a 15-minute drone flight and an hour or two of post-processing, we can get all this information and extract all these features to suit your project needs. Oh, and then right here again, I just wanted to point out that even in this 3D model, I don't have a zoomed in view of this, but you can see the paint marks showing up on the hard surfaces there as well. So very useful, just gives you a lot of information for your project, for whatever you're doing. This is now looking at mapping of a larger site. This is the closest thing I have to like the Foxconn project. Unfortunately, I don't have permission to share the Foxconn project imagery, but this is a 100-acre site, the old CNH industrial facility down in Racine. And there's big environmental remediation work being done there as the site's redeveloped. So you can use drones to very quickly and efficiently map entire sites and show and document progress of the, in this case, remediation work. You could also be documenting, construction and building progress on the site very easily. And again, I just want to really reiterate that from these flights, you're not only getting this high quality ortho photo, you're getting all the 3D data, you're getting the topographic data, you can generate line work from this. So you're basically getting a up-to-date, full survey of the site, in real time. So it's extremely valuable. It's proved extremely valuable to a lot of different project managers in different disciplines. If we go down here, then look at that circled area on the south side of the site here. Another really cool use of this, like I mentioned before, is to look at the erosion over time. So this site has a pretty sizable cliff on the south side. And if we go through these different photos, you can actually watch as the shoreline's eroding. There, the trees have fallen in. Not too much erosion there during the summer months, but you can document and actually measure that erosion and keep track of that. So again, you're getting a lot of value from these drone flights, and they can be used. The data can be used for a lot of different applications.
And we're going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. We've got about 5 minutes left, and that includes questions.
All right, I will really go fast here. Looking at flooding at this harbor here. So again, you're getting the topographic information. You can use that to look at flooding. We can look at sites as, to evaluate pavement condition. Again, we can use these same ortho photos to zoom in on any feature of the site, look at your roof condition here. And then this is kind of what a full survey looks like when it's done with drone technology. So this is probably done 90% with the drone. This is just a We Energy site down in Kenosha. And you can see then all the line work that's generated from the drone data, including the utilities. And there's always going to be some groundwork that has to be done, some things that can't be seen from the air, measure downs, that kind of thing. But you can really increase the efficiency of surveys by using this drone data. Then really quick here, we're looking at a park in Thiensville. This is what most engineers are used to seeing for a survey and then design plans. If we bring the drone aerial in there, you can just see how much more information that drone aerial provides. So really quick, I guess, I will just kind of wrap things up here with LiDAR. We didn't get through everything, but LiDAR is just kind of like one of the new buzzwords, definitely, that is being talked about in the drone world. I just want to, I guess, caution people with it. Its accuracy is about the same as photogrammetry. The big benefit is that using LiDAR, you can see better through higher vegetation to map the ground surface, but the sensors are still prohibitively expensive, much more expensive than the camera sensors on photogrammetry drones. And it's much more rigorous post-processing. So I think the LiDAR technology is improving, but there's not really that much of a benefit as compared to photogrammetry yet. And then this is just a couple examples of what a LiDAR point cloud might look like. Pretty similar to what you're going to see from photogrammetry, but more post-processing, more expensive equipment, and you're not also going to get that orthophoto from it as well. Let's see, how much time do we have right now? A couple minutes.
Yeah, we've got about 3 minutes for questions. This is, if you would like to ask a question, please do so.
Sorry, I wish I could have covered everything a little bit faster. I have a lot to show, but we got through most of it.
Well, one of the questions I would have for you is, I'll just start out with some questions, as Dan is when I work with buildings a lot, and some of the first floors or second floors, there's always a, you have to, there's sort of a canopy, you go under the building actually sets back at the second or third floor, comes out. How do you handle getting the exterior facades when you have areas that are under the building, so to speak?
And you're talking about like inspecting that visually, or getting like the
inspecting it, the exterior facade.
Yep. So yeah, overhangs can definitely be tricky. If they're shallower overhangs, you can still usually fly close enough to it and still have, good GPS signal and be safe. That it's not really an issue, especially just the sensor quality of the drones, of the cameras, is so good that even if you have to take the photos away from the building a little bit, you can still zoom in, in the photo to see what you're trying to inspect. So I've never really seen a problem or an application, I guess, or an example where that was a problem. And then as far as getting like building corners and survey line work from that, you saw on those point clouds, you can actually take angled photos that will capture the geometry under overhangs, and that can be, processed in the point cloud and again, kind of mitigate the overhangs and be able to still get building information there.
We have 2 questions right now. How do you share the large files with a client? And then the second question is how do you downsize the files without losing the details that are needed?
Right. So that was going to be the last thing I was going to talk about with GIS. GIS is a great way to share large files with clients through just a online app. Otherwise, most CAD computers, really any CAD computer these days, can handle the maps and the line work from the drone data, and we actually have special software that drastically decreases file sizes, so we can compress the large TIFF aerial files, which can oftentimes be over a gig, up to 10 gigs. We can compress those by about 1/10, so turn a 1 gig file into a 1/10 of a gig, and basically turn any map up to 1,000 acres or more into a file that's very easily shareable through any SharePoint site and usable in CAD.
So the second question was, which I think you answered part of it, is can any CAD computer machine process all the photos, line work, or the user need, or do they need a special type of computer processor?
For actually doing photogrammetric processing, like generating the point clouds, it definitely helps to have a faster, almost like a gaming type computer with a better graphics card than most CAD computers have. So the processing is definitely more intensive once you have the data processed and you just have the orthophoto and the line work or the tin surface. Most of today's modern CAD computers are definitely capable of handling that.
Okay.
Again, it's all with compressing the files and that kind of thing.
Okay, Dan, great presentation. We need to move on to our next next presentation. It's now 10:51. I'm going to do a brief introduction of John Switchenberg. He's with Grafe. He's an associate. He's our CAD manager and GIS coordinator. He's also a GIS professional. John brings about 27 years of experience in computer-aided drafting and design, CAD, and geographic information systems, GIS, related work, with a focus in strategic vision, technology innovation, technology services, and delivering quality projects to clients. John is responsible for the development of CAD and GIS at Grafe, both internally and externally for clients. He brings a lot of experience working with both local, county, state, and federal government agencies, as well as private companies and industries in respect to CAD and GIS. And then John Switchenberg is also our office manager for our Minneapolis office. With that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thanks, Fred. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about using GIS to collect, maintain, and manage building condition information. And I'm going to show you several different examples of how we've done that. Again, like Fred said, I'm our GIS leader in the company, also manage our Minneapolis office. Have over 30 years of experience in the field. And I actually do a lot of training and other things as well, beyond just managing our technologies. First and foremost, obviously, what we're talking about is building condition assessment information, and really that's asset management. So it's managing your assets, and ultimately, managing your assets is really defined by a life cycle. So when you're talking about buildings, the building condition information is really about managing the buildings and the building systems inside those buildings as well. And you start by obviously building the building itself, under construction, and then obviously managing it through its life, and then at the end, disposal of it. So asset management really is truly a life cycle. We use a product that we've developed called Infinite GIS. I'm going to show you a few projects that we've done in that, but then we also leverage other technologies as well that are out there in the industry. But ultimately, when you're talking about GIS, you really want something that is very easy to use. Obviously, when you're out in the field, you want to be able to access it remotely, be able to be out in the field and actually collecting the information and the data. And then you also want reporting, because obviously from a life cycle perspective, you want to be able to report and manage the data after the fact as well. This is an example of, of building condition assessment, actually a facade assessment. The picture here is the facade assessment for the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire from one of their towers, their residential towers, where this actually used ArcGIS online. We loaded the elevations in, and then had people there using scopes to find and locate the information, and then obviously taking pictures and storing that information. We've done similar projects all over the place, including the State Capitol Dome, health care facilities, ramp inspections, John Deere, South Wire, which is the largest manufacturer of wire in the entire United States. So this can be applied to just about any type of building or any type of facility, actually, for that matter. Really, the whole point of doing this in a GIS system is to be able to manage the data. Obviously, you can do it in many other areas, or you can do it with paper and so on, but to make it more effective and be able to manage the information, store it, and then also manage change over time. This actually is a picture of the state capitol inspection that we did, where we actually had people doing the inspections, a subcontractor doing the inspections and doing fixes. They were tethered on the outside of the building. Part of their harness was a tablet that allowed them to access the data of all of the existing fixes that were already done, so they could review those as well as document any new fixes. They did take pictures while they were up there, and then obviously did their fix of the buildings as well. The nice thing about this is once it's because it's online, it's interactive. It's always going. So if they're taking pictures, our engineers or the client's engineering staff or administrative staff can actually be viewing it and seeing it as it's going down out in the field. From a particular asset management perspective, you really are looking to manage the data, right? So GIS is great, shows all of the gives you the visual aspect of the asset management. But ultimately, what's really important is the back end data, the actual information, condition data, the life cycle, cost to repair things. In this case, this is actually Southwire, a picture of Southwire's, their criticality as well. So you can see that there's 3 different severity, occurrence, and detection ratings, and then that gets wrapped up into a criticality, which allows them to not just look at what needs to be done to the system, but also puts then a timeline to it. So obviously, if there's going to be failure, then that becomes an important critical item to be fixed. This actually is a picture of the campus down in the Milwaukee area. It's the Milwaukee Regional Medical Center campus, and this actually takes asset management to the next level. It's not just the buildings; it's about all of the surrounding information that's on the site as well. So in this case, you can see there's a lot of green trees on there, but there's also utilities, contour mapping, all of the information that is of anything that's on the site, including, in this case, they actually use this system to manage their steam and chilled water for the facility. And they also have GPS that's actually connected within those systems as well, so they can go out and do locates and actually accurately do locates and data collection as well. In their case, they actually do construction observation. So they actually use the GPS and the system to be able to pick up anything that's been daylighted on the site as well. So that all then allows them to keep their system and to continually update it and make it more accurate. From a building condition perspective, you can wrap everything into that. So when we're talking about buildings, we're talking about everything within inside the building, roof, the grounds, the structural aspects of the building, the architectural aspects of all of the floor coverings, wall coverings, doors, windows, the mechanical, plumbing, electrical, environmental. So obviously when you're talking about environmental, you're looking for lead contamination or asbestos, and so on. And then the facade. We already kind of talked a little bit about the facade, but the last presentation was talking about drones. Using drones to collect facade information and pull it into a system like this, and then actually be able to use that is obviously the ultimate part of being able to do that, especially on multi-story buildings. We've found that you can scope multi-story buildings, but anything over about 3 to 4, maybe 5 floors, and it starts to get harder to do. So you really need to be elevated, and that's where the drones come in and do a lot more. But in this case, you would do all of the different levels of the building, and then locate all of the points. It's important though to not just look at it from a point perspective either. You can see here on the screen that there's some pink outlines, which are actually areas, and there's some green lines, which are actually linear. So when you're looking at a wall, you want to be able to obviously do a linear. When you're looking at maybe carpeting or tile flooring and looking at the condition of that, it's a lot easier just to have the floor plan on system, and then be able to draw those areas that you're documenting as polygons within the system. From a construction administration perspective, it actually assists quite a bit and lessens the amount of time that are, like in case for us, lessens a lot of time that we have to be out in the field for doing construction administration, because it can be automated. So this is actually a private facility where we went out and inspected the ramps. The ramps are actually underground ramps. So we did all of the inspection work. We created the application. In this case, it actually runs in 2 different applications so that we can be disconnected out in the field as well, because obviously underground ramps are tough to have good internet access. So we do it disconnected, and then once we're back to internet, we reload it into the system. But what this allows us to do then is incorporate designs into it as well. So we can actually take the information that we collect out in the field, push it into Revit, and then Revit can then push it back once the design is completed. And then we can use this for doing construction administration. So we allow the contractors to actually have access to the system, and they'll see all of the initial stuff that we collected, as well as the design information, what needs to be done. They can then log pictures and times of through the construction process, and we can monitor that again without being on site as much. And what that also does is gives the client then the ability to be able to see that as it's going through the process as well. A big part of doing building condition assessments or facility condition assessments is really for budgeting purposes, right? So really you want to be able to take that data and not just do everything that I've talked about already, from a data collection perspective or cost estimating, but then also look at it and allow them to be able to adjust year to year as things are being done or not. And in this case, you can see on the screen here that really in 2024 in this one facility, they need to spend about $6 million. Well, that's pretty hefty and obviously not going to happen in 1 year probably for this particular facility. So they can adjust those items, either pull things forward or push things backwards depending upon what the criticality ratings are and so on. But it allows them to have a tool then to actually manage that data, manage the assessment needs, and then be able to schedule that and budget for it. In the case of this is actually pictures of the Southwire project that we did. In the case of that, they're actually doing master planning at the facilities as well to be able to manage their budgets and look at long term throughout. In this case, it goes to 2030, but it could be really applied to any time frames. From a work order perspective, obviously, once you actually do the building condition assessment information, it's nice to wrap that into a true asset management system, which you can take that data and pull it to different systems. This just happens to be a look at or pictures of a sanitary sewer structure asset management, but it could really be just as easily pictures of building condition. And in this case, then, from an internal perspective, you can look at it from a staffing, equipment, supplies, inventory. If it's a air handling unit, there's things that you have to be doing to it on the building, and you have staff internally that are actually working on that. So you can pretty much manage internally then all your costs from a work order perspective as well. Return on investment is, obviously it's a discussion that you have to have when you're looking at putting together systems. And, depending upon, size of building or facilities and number of square footage, I guess, of those facilities. But it's pretty typical that you have a 2 to 5 year return on investment when you're talking about pulling these systems together for your facilities. And again, depending upon what those systems are, like the MRMC campus down in Milwaukee, their rate of return really was a lot quicker than that because they literally didn't have anything to manage the campus with. And so that really is kind of dependent on not just the size of your actual building systems, but also what you're actually doing currently from a perspective of managing your assets as well. One of the other big things that comes out of this is just ease of reporting. Getting information out to a reporting agency if it's if they're managing that building, or being able to share maps and share the information with decision makers. Getting the information into your hands so that you can manage it. Typically what we would see in the past is typical building condition assessment would actually be, just a report, and if it's a multi-story building with a lot of square footage, you would get all of the information in a large report and then have a summary. So this screenshot here of the map and the pictures itself would be just a piece of the appendix typically, and then you'd get that hard copy report, maybe digitally, in a PDF or maybe a Word doc format. But now with integrating this into more GIS and automating it, it really gives you the ability then to just manage the data, be able to update it, keep it fluid and keep it moving forward, where a report is really a one-time snapshot that just gives you the indication of what's happening to the building at that point in time. With that, that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions right now. I have a question for you. This can be used for also using drones on the exterior facade and then implementing that information into Infinite GIS. Now, how does a client, say an owner, want to use this after they've done the repairs and keep track of these in the future? And from both, how does this whole process work? Can you kind of give a line thing of what the benefits are for tracking the projects and then looking at it like doing a parking garage, for example, looking at what the parking garage looks like, and then 5 years again doing another thing, and then you kind of get a feel for what it is. Now, how does an owner use that?
Sure. So, right now we're actually doing a project for the city of Madison where we're inspecting their parking garages. They do it on a rotating basis. I believe it's either 3 or 5 years. And in the past, it's all been done manually. So we actually took their manual information, put it into the system, and then are using the system to manage our inspections and then also giving back their information. So we're using our Infinite GIS system. Ultimately, they have an asset management system that information is going to go into for them to manage it. But ultimately, if you are doing the data collection and doing the project within a GIS, it's easily accessible. It's easy to take it out and dump the information and put it into other systems, whether that's just database driven systems or it's actually GIS systems of some sort. But ultimately, from our perspective, this actually helps us be more effective on the projects, but then it also helps the client then be more effective in the future and be able to manage their information. In some cases, like Southwire, we actually sell a subscription to our service, and that just becomes their system that they manage the data in. But ultimately, it could be taken to literally any system. And then, from the standpoint of the drones, Dan had a great presentation. Flying the facades with drones, and that can be saved as videos that are attached into the GIS system, and it can also be saved into 3D models and pushed into Revit and other 3D type models, and then that information can be stored in a myriad of different ways. But ultimately, using the video that comes from that to be able to do your inspections, and like Dan said, you can, when you do those videos with the drones, I mean, you can literally zoom into a 4-inch square and be able to see the defects on the facade very easily, and map them then as well. So,
Any other questions? I can add to that a little bit. We just recently had the State Capitol Dome, when we see contractors doing this more and more on exterior facade projects, where we've done the inspection, we've done the repair contract documents. We're finding more and more contractors are taking a drone and actually flying the exterior facade, because our inspection was done 2, maybe even 3 years before that, and everything's based on that, and things have happened afterwards. They fly it, they look for we request that they do a full inspection beforehand. And one of the ways they do it quickly is by using a drone. We then put this into GIS right away, and we sit down and look what other repairs need to be made. And we see contractors using this system more and more to track repairs and what's going on. So.
And the drone technology too, Fred. 5 years ago, you couldn't fly a drone over the state capitol. Now, those limitations are being less and less. And our office is in downtown Minneapolis here, and we've done it on a couple buildings down here, and it's tough when you're in certain areas. You got to look at fly zones and everything as well. So there are times when you can't use a drone, but the technology and the limitations are becoming less limitations and better technology, and as that time goes on, we'll be able to leverage those technologies together a lot easier.
Okay, we still have about 5 minutes left for questions. Is there any questions? Go back to Dan's presentation. Is there any questions you would like to ask Dan at this point again? Was that the Wisconsin State Capitol or Minnesota? I believe that was the Wisconsin State Capitol. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
That was the Wisconsin State Capitol.
Okay. And then have either of you applied drone surveys to interior spaces?
This is Dan, and I have not done a traditional, I guess, a drone survey inside. I have flown and inspected the interior of Miller Park, like looking at the lights up, in the ceiling with the roof open. So that's, I guess, the closest I've gotten to interior inspection work with a drone. But it's definitely, for large spaces, it is doable.
And this is John. You don't necessarily need to use drones interior. There's a lot of LiDAR technology that you can, and LiDAR units that you can leverage, that you can put them on a cart and actually cart them around inside the facility. And you just have to make sure that, obviously, you can't see around walls. So you just need to make sure that you do enough spots inside of it to collect all of the data. And then typically the same software that they use pretty much for drones, for putting all the data together and pushing it out to CAD or GIS, is applied to that same technology in interior to spaces. You just have to be careful because, you know, some of it is it's cool and it's cheap. You know, there's a Google version where you can actually set your phone down inside of an office or a building, and it'll give you that, but it's not accurate enough to do design from. But you know, in our case, we actually have a LiDAR unit that you can use outdoor or indoors, and we've used it in both. And it just sits on a tripod, and you can pretty much map just about anything with that.
Other questions for Dan or for regarding unmanned flights or Infinite GIS? I don't hear any more questions, so I'd like to thank both Dan and John for their presentations. They were very, very good and instructive. We now have a short break. Please stay logged in and join us again at 11:30 for the Kettle Moraine Springs Fish Hatchery renovation case study that will be presented. So again, join us back at 11:30 a.m. and we'll finish up with this case study. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jake Emke. I am the State of Wisconsin project manager for the project. I work for the Division of Facilities Development and Management. I've been involved with the project for the last couple of years, working with the team through design and construction of the improvements.
My name is Andy Rowan. I work for the Department of Natural Resources at the Kettle Moraine Springs Hatchery. I am the hatchery supervisor.
My name is Brent Binder. I'm a natural resources engineer with the DNR. My role on the project was the agency representative, so I acted as the owner's contact for the design team and the manager.
I'm Scott Chelson with MSA. We're working on the Kettle Moraine Springs Fish Hatchery renovation project. I'm the project manager through pre-design, through design, and now construction.
I'm Austin Shaner with CD Smith Construction. I was the project manager for the general contractor on the Kettle Moraine Springs Hatchery renovation project.
So it wouldn't be a virtual conference without a couple of technological tweaks. So appreciate you guys bearing with us there. Welcome everyone. This is Jake Emke. Thanks for joining us for the final session of the day. Over the coming hour, our team is really excited to share the details of the planning, design, and construction of the Kettle Moraine Springs Fish Hatchery renovation project. So although you only hear from 5 of the team members today in the presentation, understand there were many, many critical players that participated in this project along the way and contributed to overall project success. So today we'll be touching on an overview of the project design criteria, construction of the renovations, current operations, and then we'll wrap things up with some lessons learned and Q&A. So at this point, I'll turn things over to DNR to review the project background.
Originally, the main property was a dairy farm, then converted to a private fish hatchery by Ben Witten in 1955. The state purchased the property in 1979. Around that time, the state also bought part of the neighboring property owned by Rowan and Margie Peter. The state added a fish building, installed some raceways, and drilled some wells in the early 80s. In the early 2000s, the state bought another small private hatchery in Beechwood, about 3 miles from the main hatchery. This was purchased to help raise fish for the quotas assigned to the Kettle Moraine Springs State Fish Hatchery. Over time, many different types of fish were reared at Kettle Moraine Springs Hatchery, including cold and cool water species. Recently, the spring water feeding the hatchery has slowed significantly. With spring water being the main source of water for the hatchery, this made hatchery cut back on the amount of fish it raised and the size it could produce. With most of the hatchery infrastructure from the 50s, a lot of it is failing or is out of commission currently. Due to the new phosphorus discharge limits in our watershed, the old lagoon-style treatment will not be enough to treat the water properly. With a potential open water source and the fish being exposed to predators outside, increasing our biosecurity is a must. Currently, the hatchery is not meeting the goals of stocking the correct size of fish and the correct time of stocking. So now I will hand it over to Brent.
Thank you, Andy, and hello, everyone. When considering DNR's goals for this project, we really have to focus on our main objective, and that's producing healthy fish. To accomplish this, the fish need to be raised at a natural growth rate over a 14-month period. They should be kept wild or feral as possible through limited human interaction using cyclical light and feeding schedules. The fish should be kept virus-free. And most importantly, they should be stocked at both the right size and at the correct time of year. That primary goal will be aided through a few secondary ones. A successful project will replace the existing aging infrastructure. You've heard Andy describe some of the existing deficiencies at the current hatchery. Know that all portions of this old facility are somewhere in the fail, patch, fail cycle. An assessment of the existing facility was completed during project planning, and it was determined that repairing the existing facility would require an equivalent outlay of funds and would not meet additional project goals. Third, the new hatchery must have a reliable source of fresh water. While the current spring water on site is of high quality, the volume is not consistent. Production varies seasonally, yearly, and is currently showing a rapid decline from approximately 400 gallons per minute just a few years ago to only 60 gallons per minute today. This is clearly not enough to sustain rearing needs. In order to raise healthy fish, the facility must be fully biosecure. This includes both securing the water supply by eliminating the open spring collection system, the treatment of the reuse water within the hatchery, and ultraviolet treatment of the discharge water. Biosecurity within the hatchery requires an enclosed facility. This allows access to be strictly controlled with eggs, staff, and equipment being disinfected prior to entering each individual's facility. As you learn more about the hatchery campus, please keep in mind that one aquaculture building includes 3 separate hatcheries from a fish health perspective. Finally, as beings on this planet, everything we do produces a waste stream that must be managed. Our hatchery is no different. It is located within the Milwaukee River watershed, and therefore the discharge must meet the lower phosphorus limits. With that, I'll turn you over to Scott to walk through the project design.
Thanks, Brent. Nice job. In this part of the talk, we're going to talk about the pre-design, the design of water flow through the site, fish life cycle. Andy will do that. And then I'll finish up with the wastewater treatment. Moving on to pre-design. The premise of the project was based on developing rearing systems for 4 specific species. A bioplan was developed for the rearing, and recirculating aquaculture systems were identified as the rearing systems that were desired by DNR. So we had disinfection, incubation, RAS, and PRAS. Following that in the bioplan further defined the supporting systems that would be needed for the rearing systems. And beyond that, that identified all the engineering trades and disciplines needed for the design of this fish hatchery. Definitely a unique project and a unique facility. There were no go-bys or one to follow. We were doing this, one of a kind. Moving on to the project, the hatchery is located on a rural Wisconsin site. So the availability of utilities and other things that might be available in towns weren't available to the fish hatchery. So the project had to account for or address things like availability of electric power, availability of natural gas. We had to develop site and civil development. We needed water supply, wells, and well houses. We needed a water treatment system. We needed water distribution systems. We needed a liquid oxygen storage system, stormwater facilities. We had wastewater collection systems, wastewater treatment, and an administration building and standby generation. So clearly you can see by this slide, it wasn't just a hatchery project, it was much, much more. It was like designing a small town. Defining an owner's vision always takes work. And so the ultimate initial vision of DNR was to have 6 species-specific aquaculture systems. water treatment, wastewater treatment, and administrative facilities all under one roof. This vision was estimated to cost over $50 million. The construction budget for this project was only $20 million. So how do you take a $50 million vision and fit it to a $20 million reality? We use value engineering, scope reduction, teamwork, patience, and compromise to meet that $20 million reality. If we wouldn't have had a collaborative effort between DFDM and the DNR owner team, I don't believe we would have been successful. So how did we do it? We changed the vision from all under one roof to a modular unit design. So we designed one aquaculture building and reproduce it. Then we also worked in construction staging to fit the budget. So we provided for up to 4 additional aquaculture buildings on the site. We have water treatment in its own building, wastewater treatment in its own building, and an administrative building for those functions. This is how we maintain the DNR's ultimate objectives for the site and long-term site view. So moving into design, we were still working through all the details of the revised pre-design. So we ended up with a little rework. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk through the site from the flow of water. So we'll go from groundwater to outfall. All hatcheries, they depend on a biosecure water source. So we're pumping from 3 different aquifers: glacial, the Silurian, and the sandstone. So we have a Silurian well, we have a second Silurian well, we have a sandstone well, and then we have a glacial well that provides potable water. Moving on to the well house, specifically well house 2. Well house 1 is identical. It's kind of holding with our concept of modular. So we designed the same building and duplicate it. We used Revit to develop the design and then used a program called Inkscape to present the design model in a virtual and interactive way with the owner team. You'll kind of see the design of the well house and then a POA of the walls, so you see the interior systems. Moving into the well house has 2 primary rooms: a pump and a control room, and an oxygen and ozone room. All well pumps are submersible wells and operate on VFDs. The entire site is interconnected with a private fiber optic network and then controlled by a SCADA system. So all the systems are integrated. We're using ozone to pre-treat for hydrogen sulfide and pre-oxidized metals. Leaving the well house, we move to the site. As part of the project, we elected to keep all the waters separate, so that we can maintain temperature. Temperature is a critical component to fish rearing. So we had a transfer main from well house 1, another transfer main from well house 2, a transfer main from sandstone well, and also a transfer main for the potable water. All the water was routed to the water treatment plant for conditioning. So moving into the water treatment plant, I'll give you a couple images of the design model. Peel away and kind of see what's inside there. So here's the layout. The potable water comes in at the top of this slide, goes through a pressure tank and through a high capacity water softener. The treated potable water is distributed amongst the campus properties. The Silurian and sandstone water is brought into the bottom of the slide into the building and valved so that it can be treated by one of 2 parallel trains that are identical. The treatment trains include a crossflow degasser, parallel upflow biofilters, an LHO, and head tank. Once again, we're keeping the water separate as treated, so it's valved and they can maintain the Silurian temperatures. This image gives you a good view of the model, and then you get a comparative photo of the real life, so you can see how realistic the model was. Moving away from the water treatment plant, once on the site, we kept the water, the treated water separate. So we had a treated water for Silurian go into the aquaculture buildings, and we also had one for the sandstone water. As we move into the aquaculture building, I'm going to hand off to Andy, allow him to walk you guys through the fish cycle. I will pick up after him and finish the tour of the site.
Thank you, Brent. Eggs are spawned in the wild and will be brought into the disinfection room where they'll be disinfected with iodine. Once they are disinfected and rinsed off, they will be handed through the window to the hatchery staff that was not taking part of the spawning process. This helps ensure full biosecurity throughout the hatchery. In the incubation room, staff will place the eggs in the incubation jars and set a flow into the jars so the eggs will be rolling just slightly. This will prevent fungus from growing on them. After about 25 days, the eggs will be mature enough to be moved into the praz room. In the praz room, the eggs will be placed into the 12 tanks. In a few days, these eggs will hatch. These fish will stay in this room until they are about 200 to the pound or about 2.5 inches long. At this time, they'll be pumped into the RAS room. In the RAS room, there are 6 18-foot diameter tanks. These fish will stay in this room until they are 11 to the pound or about 6 inches long. At that time, staff will use a fish pump to empty the tanks into the fish distribution truck. Once the fish are on the truck, off they go to one of the 20+ different stocking sites for Lake Michigan. And I'll hand it back to Scott now.
Thanks, Andy. So you see the model here again of the aquaculture buildings. So the aquaculture buildings include a PRAS system and a RAS system. Partial recirculation are systems that turn over their total water volume more than once a day. RAS systems have a much higher recirculating rate, so they turn over their water at a much slower rate. So in Kettle Moraine, the PRAS system will turn its water over anywhere from 4 to 6 times a day. The RAS system will turn its water over approximately once every other day. So I'm going to kind of walk through the recirculation loop of the PRAS system. So water is drained from fish culture tanks. It flows through a 500 micron drum filter where solids are removed. The water is then pumped into a GMT, which includes a cross-loaded gasser and LHO. The water is disinfected in inline UV and then returned to the fish culture tank. So that's the loop. That's the recirculation loop. So you have water going around. The RAS system has a very, very similar recirculation loop. The exception or additions is the RAS system includes an MBBR biofilter and mechanical chilling. Because the water is not being turned over every day, we need pre-treat or we need further treatment of the water and also mechanical chilling to maintain the temperatures. In addition to the PRAS rooms and the RAS rooms, each aquaculture building includes an ozone oxygen room, a mechanical chilling room, and an electric room to support the rearing systems. Moving away from the aquaculture buildings, back to the site. Following through our concept of keeping everything separate, we had to design multiple collection systems so that we could design the wastewater treatment based on actual loadings and not average loadings. So we have an incubation wastewater system, collection system that routes wastewater from the aquaculture buildings to the wastewater plant. We have an aquaculture wastewater collection system. We have a solids wastewater system. And then we have finally a sanitary wastewater collection system. Sanitary wastewater is pumped to a fast system for pretreatment, and the treated water from the fast system is pumped back to the wastewater treatment plant. Following treatment at the wastewater plant, water is discharged to Big Pond through an outfall pipe. Moving into the wastewater plant. A couple views of the model. The wastewater plant was designed for solids removal and dewatering, as well as tertiary treatment for phosphorus removal to meet a strict phosphorus limit. Water flows into the wastewater plant through a mix and flocculation tank, through parallel disc filters, through flow metering, and then through UV disinfection to the outfall in Big Pond. Backwash water from the disc filters is routed to the solids wastewater lift station. Solids wastewater lift station pumps water into parallel incline belt presses where the solids are removed and dewatered and disposed of. Backwash water from the incline press is then returned to the head of the tank or head of the plant. This is the primary treatment of the wastewater plant. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Austin, and he can tell you about how he and his team constructed this project.
Thanks, Scott. Again, I'm Austin Shaner with CD Smith Construction. I was the project manager on the project. We're going to run through the overall timeline and kind of what the field management side of things really look like as we work through structure phasing complexities. Coming into this project, we knew it would take an immense amount of manpower to get the new hatchery buildings constructed, especially before winter. We had multiple crews on site working on various buildings throughout the first 6 months of the project. And the icons below will kind of represent the activities in progress throughout each month as we work towards building completion. We'll jump right into the timeline here with July. Work on site begins. We work on stripping the site and installing dewatering measures. We wanted to start construction on the perimeter site buildings due to that center core. We want to get that dewatering in place and let that kind of get ready for the big push. Excavation on the well houses 1 and 2, as well as administration buildings started. And as we excavate for these buildings, we start foundations right away, and we're pouring concrete daily. So at the end of July, construction's underway on 3 of the hatchery buildings. In August, foundations wrap up on the administration buildings, and foundations begin on both fish culture buildings. Underground MEP roughings are being completed in the well houses, and we are now working on 6 of the hatchery buildings. In September, foundations begin on the water treatment plant. The well houses and administration buildings begin framing. Underground piping roughings are in progress in the fish culture buildings. This is an immense amount of piping, as you can kind of see from some of the models that Scott showed. It took an immense amount of coordination as we poured in the tanks for all the fish culture equipment as well. Moving into October, metal roofing and siding wraps up on the well houses as well as the administration building. Foundations commence on the wastewater treatment plant. Framing of the wastewater treatment plant and fish culture buildings begin. Aquaculture tanks are installed prior to metal siding. Timing was crucial for a lot of those aquaculture pieces since there were large amounts of equipment. We wanted to give adequate room to get those pieces into the buildings. Work proceeds on all 7 hatchery buildings at once, along with construction of other site items such as the lock storage and generators. In November, we're spray foaming and metal siding the fish culture buildings. This is crucial, as you could imagine. November, we're running out of warm days to get the spray foam done, so it was crucial. We couldn't miss a day. If we missed a day, it would push us back weeks in our overall schedule. Interior finishes are being installed in the administration and well house buildings. Framing begins on the wastewater treatment plant, and then also the water treatment equipment is being set in the water treatment building. Finishes begin in the water treatment plant as well as fish culture building number 1. We're now moving into December. Interior finishes conclude in the fish culture buildings. Well house equipment begins installation. Water treatment equipment is being set in the water treatment plant yet. We now have all buildings enclosed and commence interior mechanical work. So this is kind of what the site looked like in August. You can see there's a lot of foundations going in, and then kind of what it looked like as we ended the year here in December. Now that we have the buildings enclosed, we can kind of work on building finalization. As I kind of mentioned, we wanted to commence that interior mechanical work. So in January, the water treatment equipment piping and power roughings are underway in the water treatment plant. We are setting and piping aquaculture equipment in both fish culture buildings. And then MEP roughings continue throughout the wastewater treatment plant as well. Moving into February, we're long lead times on the power distribution equipment. We were able to attain that in February and commence work on all the final power tie-ins to all the buildings. And then we were also setting and piping equipment in the wastewater treatment plant as well. Looking into March, in this stage, we had already started manufacturer startups in multiple buildings. And then obviously, as everybody's aware, the rug is pulled out from under us and the COVID-19 pandemic shuts down travel for our manufacturers. At this time, piping is also continuing in the wastewater treatment plant as we prepare for final equipment arrivals. And then kind of the SCADA programming begins on site as well. In April, we are continuing the program as much as possible. On site, we're removing any temporary heat and then closing temporary openings in the buildings, as well as the water treatment plant begins its runtime, and we get those biofilters seedings to begin. Looking into May, this is more or less a continuation of what we saw in April. Ongoing building completions and programming continue as we kind of wait for the travel bans to be lifted for our manufacturers. Once we hit June, we are finally able to schedule manufacturers to travel to site. Over the next few months, we continue startups and training to get the hatchery online. This is kind of what we looked at in January, and to what we looked like in June as we were able to start getting everything wrapped up and finalized. And I'll turn it over to Andy to talk about his current operations.
So today, currently, all the buildings are up and running so we can test all the equipment. During this time, it also is allowing us time to give the biobeds time to seed in building 61 and 62 so we can move fish into the RAS room. Hatchery staff are setting up feeders and other miscellaneous tasks to be prepared for when we can move fish into the buildings. Right now, we're just in a kind of wait and see, make sure everything is good to go before we put live animals in the new hatchery. So I will hand it back to Jake now.
Thank you, Andy. So that is a pretty good overview of the planning, design, and construction of the facility. We wanted to take a few minutes now to touch on lessons learned from all parties, what we learned about the project that we can take forward to future projects, and also convey to you guys in the audience as the AE and agency community. So we've got 3 that we want to touch on for sure, and I believe time permitting, we might have a couple other to touch on and then be able to open things up for questions. So the first item overall was the division of work. So DFDM single trade bidding went into effect January 1st, 2014. So quite a while ago, but it's certainly been over the last 6 years a learning process of how to appropriately divide responsibility of work in the bidding documents. So for example, everything is under the general prime contractor, but we need to be sure to tailor in the documents who constructs and who should have that in their respective bid. Should it be directly under the GPC, under the mechanical contractor, the electrical contractor, the plumbing contractor, the controls contractor, what's owner furnished, what's owner provided, etc. So the team on each individual project needs to be sure that all scope items are covered somewhere to prevent change orders, but also that a particular scope item is not doubled up and covered twice, causing the owner, DFDM, or DNR to pay for something more than once. So the Kettle Moraine Fish Hatchery project was as complex as it gets with the level of coordination and detail and discussions on this particular topic. I really like this as a lesson learned, not because I think it went poorly. As a matter of fact, I think it actually went really well, but not without hours and hours of discussions during late design to kind of cross-reference, cross-check, pick and choose here and there. Okay, where is this piece of equipment? Where is the installation being covered in the bidding documents? So like I said, not something that went poorly, but I think it really applies to all multidiscipline DFDM projects. Before we throw a bid package out on the street for bidding, kind of asking yourself as the whole project team, where is this covered? Am I covered? Are we avoiding a change order on this scope item? So I'll turn it over to Scott to talk a little more in detail about specifics of what we're done and any particular other items.
Thanks, Jake. I do want to reiterate that this process that we came up with on Kettle Moraine was done collaboratively with DFDM engineers. It was very, very complicated because we had the general, the MEPs, and a separate SCADA contractor contract. So being clear about division of work was imperative. We were able to, in the spec, it's a little easier because we could use divisions to divide the work. So Obviously, Division 22 is the plumbing contractor. Materials and stuff under Division 23 is the mechanical contractor. 26, 27 electrical contractor. And a lot of the balancing specs would fall under the GBC. One of the things we determined during design is that we needed to duplicate some of the material specs across those the lines. So like a good example would be PVC pipe. It was spec both under Division 22 and Division 40, so that we weren't cross-referencing across those spec lines. That was something we were concerned about, is we're trying to create a division of work, but yet we're saying, hey, from Division 22 to refer to Division 40 for a material spec. So we chose to duplicate material specs for each one of the disciplines. The drawings were a much more difficult challenge to try to identify division work. So what we did right on the title sheet, we developed a table, and what we did is we assigned the drawing type to one of the trades. So you can kind of see in this table, kind of a little bit small, but you can see how that first discipline, that's identifying the trade, and then the next column over is the actual trade or the drawing type identifier. So you can see that an E-sheet, anything shown on an E-sheet is supposed to be under the electrical contractor's scope. So we took that one step further, and then on the P&IDs, we actually identified ownership with the bubbles and the equipment items identifiers. So we zoom in. So you can see that bubble there, and in the upper right corner, there's a Q, and that Q is defined there to the right. And basically, so on the bubbles and the P&ID, the INC drawings, we identified the trade that was responsible for those pieces of equipment or materials. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Austin, and he can comment on how the system actually worked for him.
Yeah, thanks Scott. From the contractor aspect, it went well. You know, on each project, we expect some scope work, gaps in the scope of work, but for the most part, the way the construction documents were broken apart allows us to provide clean breaks of scope for each contractor. So I really think the time taken to break this up this way was very helpful in the bidding process as well as throughout the project.
Okay, so our second lesson learned relates to the implementation and commissioning of the project. Hatchery staff have a considerable knowledge and expertise regarding site details, the needs of the fish, and rearing technologies. As the end user, staff are also very invested in the project's success. Fortunately, on this project, the design team welcomed DNR's involvement from day one, and I would suggest that great value was realized from this involvement. Staff were able to provide the why to many of the aquaculture needs, explain how they raise fish, how they would work within a space, question design features early, and weigh in on equipment selection. This, of course, was a mutually beneficial opportunity. With their involvement, DNR staff began to get a feel for the way operations would go. They were able to learn how the systems function together. Staff identified owner-supplied equipment needs and had the opportunity to start the training process through their understanding of the design. All of these have proven critical as the project delivery was tightly woven into an existing rearing class of fish in the old facility. As AEs, I would suggest that you don't hesitate in leveraging the owner for their knowledge within DFD's processes. While DNR's involvement aided staff preparation for startup, training, and project acceptance, there remains opportunities for improvement. With most of the training occurring between March and May, and fish just now starting to move into the new facility, with other portions of the hatchery not seeing fish until potentially April of 2021, the limited interaction with the equipment since training, relearning systems has taken some effort. As the project delivery schedule is developed and adjusted during construction, it would be a benefit to the user to regularly consider training needs. This may include providing training materials early, postponing or rescheduling training, and or providing draft O&Ms right before the training is completed. In this case, staff have been and continue to operate the facility without product manuals or reference materials. This has resulted in several inquiries to material suppliers, subcontractors, and the design team for follow-up. Austin, I was wondering if you could give us a contractor's perspective on this topic.
Absolutely. Obviously, this facility is quite unique, and to reiterate what Brent said, there's a lot of new equipment for the hatchery staff to learn and adapt to. And through the training process, through the timeline, you kind of heard the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic surely did not help our efforts. And I truly agree with Brent that the turnover and owner training schedule should have been reviewed closer on this one, and then at that time modified to kind of meet the project demands. So as a contractor team, we could have been there to help the owner out.
So prepare for the worst, aim for the best is the next lesson learned. So with this one, during design, we identified multiple contingency plans. But one of the biggest things that we wanted to address in the construction documents, to be clear for the contractor and the owner, is the fact that this was an operating fish hatchery, meaning that we're constructing a new hatchery within the facilities of an existing hatchery. So making sure that the contractor is aware of the risks and potentially some of the means and methods limitations that would have to be implemented not to affect or endanger the existing operations. So that was drawn out in contract documents. I'm going to turn it over to Andy, and Andy can give his perspective from the owner of actually operating his hatchery during construction.
Thank you, Scott. With construction taking place in the middle of the existing hatchery where we are raising fish, safety was one of my top priorities. Hatchery staff had to wear all the appropriate PPEs and get used to watching out for construction traffic. There was no accidents with the hatchery staff or contractors. With some of the new hatchery pipes having to run through the old hatchery, this was on my mind a lot due to the chances of existing water lines being hit. This did happen twice, but in both cases, hatchery staff and the contractors worked together in a timely fashion to fix the pipes and no fish were lost. The time I had to invest in the new hatchery was a lot more than I thought it would have been. This pulled me away from the day-to-day operations of the old hatchery. My staff also was not able to complete a lot of the duties in a timely fashion in the old hatchery due to the fact that I would have to constantly pull them away to bring them up to speed, get their thoughts, ideas, review plans, and attend training. So having both the project going on and raising fish in the old hatchery was very time consuming and stressful at times. So I will hand it back to Austin now.
Yeah, and kind of to elaborate on what Andy was saying, there was definitely bumps in the road as there is in numerous projects, but looking back at some of the items we had to deal with, record precipitation in fall 2019, I kind of laugh when I see this picture because there's no roof on on one of the fish culture buildings there. That means the snow was early November, and then of course we get hit with the pandemic in the spring of 2020, as we kind of touched on a couple of times. But obviously it takes a great project team to work through these situations like these, and that's exactly what we did. The DNR was extremely patient as the contractor teams invaded their operations, and as well as when it came to making those tie-ins to the existing hatchery facilities.
Great. Well, thank you. That is what we had for the case study for the Kettle Moraine Springs Fish Hatchery. I'm going to open it up for questions, and I see there's one that has been submitted. Looks like probably most appropriate to be answered by DNR. So I will read that, and Brett and Andy, you should be able to also see it as well and able to respond. So did this disrupt the DNR's typical yearly stocking of fish? Will they be able to stock more fish next year due to this upgrade? As an avid fisherman, it is great to see this project come to completion through COVID. Great job, team.
So I can answer the question. We were able to stock out all the yearling fish. Nothing changed on that end. And we will be able to stock more fish this coming year, the spring of 2021. We are going from anywhere from about 200 and 230,000 fish reared in the old hatchery to next year stocking about 340,000 steelhead.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. I do not see any further questions at this point. Does anyone in the audience have any questions they'd like to type into the Q&A feature or through the raise hand? Questions, comments?
Hey, Jake, this is Aaron Goodyan, Meet and Hunt. Hey, first off, yeah, great presentation. Graphics were super helpful to understand the project. Early on, we talked about kind of the budget and how kind of what was needed was going to cost significantly more than kind of the available dollars. So would the team be able to kind of elaborate on the process of coming back down to the budget? I know you said that there were every team player was kind of involved, but was there any process highlights or big picture items on how the budget came down to be where it needed to be?
I will punt this question to Scott. I feel like this question caused him possibly a lot of sleepless nights, and he can give the level of detail on how we got from that 50 to 20 better than anyone, I think.
Yeah, there are many steps in the process. We didn't just jump from 50 to 20. I think some of the ongoing joke amongst the team is that I've been taking stuff away from Andy for the last 4 years. But we did things like, I mean, we were cutting the project even a month, even 2 months before I go into bid, and then things like pavement. We were taking pavement out of the project. Some of the biggest things that we did was just that transition from one building, one roof to multiple buildings, modular, so that we could essentially work our way into the budget rather than saying we got this big building and we start just slicing off pieces of it. We were able to basically say, we'll design what we're looking for, we'll estimate it, and then if it doesn't fit in the budget, then we wouldn't construct it, or we wouldn't include it in the bid. So there are several components that are somewhat designed in the background that DNR could leverage probably in the future that we weren't able to include as part of this project.
Another comment on that, it was just a really great experience kind of working as the team to get down to that drastic cut and down to the final budget. So as Scott mentioned, ballpark $20 million budget. I think the number we were expecting on bid day, give or take, was $20,200,000. So pretty sizable number. And CD Smith came within $2,000 of that. So on that size of a project, to be able to go through the entire value engineering process, cutting scope, tweaking scope, prioritizing scope, and still being that close to the final number, that was great. I know I called Scott at about 2:08 on bid day with that news, and we were both pretty happy. And we had 4 total bids. 3 were pretty tight, and then we had 1 outlier. So just a few additional comments on the budget overall. There's another question that came in. It seems like pre-manufactured buildings were not used. Why not? Scott?
Pre-manufactured buildings. So we elected, because of cost, we were moving towards using the pole building style because they were custom buildings. The original design concept actually was around pre-engineered buildings, and it was deemed by the team that one of the cost savings things was to move more towards a metal sided roof or metal sided building. So it was considered, it was evaluated, but it was considered to be more expensive than the buildings we constructed.
Thank you. Brent and Andy, maybe more Brent, is there any further information you want to give on the question or the comments related to, I guess, budget and VE process? You know, Scott joked that he had been taking things away from you guys for years, but just DNR's perspective on that process overall and relative to what we're, I guess, walking away with today in terms of what's on site. Any further comments?
Generally, I would say there's no doubt that it was a hard and challenging process to go through while we were in it. The fact that DNR was at the table and working through every decision that the design team was going through at the time really helped us to prioritize what items we were willing to, I guess, let go of and what items we were willing to potentially hold for another time. That also gave us the ability to then work with DFDM staff, the designer, and add critical items back into the scope during construction as we got to certain points where we felt we could start to utilize some of the contingency.
Thank you, Brent. All right, I do not see any other questions. Does anyone in the audience have further questions or comments for discussion as we wrap up the final session of the day here? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Special thanks to MSA's marketing team for helping us put together this presentation and adding some additional graphics to make sure the audience members got a full view of the site and how everything came together. Yeah, so I will turn it over to ACEC to wrap things up for today's conference.
All right, great. Thank you to everyone that just presented that session. I think the state has a lot of exciting, unique projects that are certainly design and construction challenges. And this is certainly an example of that. So thanks, guys. It's just a great project. So I guess with that, this is going to be the end of our conference for today. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for attending. Like I said at the beginning of the conference, there's going to be an evaluation link that either pops up as soon as the Zoom meeting is done, or else you'll get an email with a link to fill out an evaluation of your experience today. I just ask that you have, that you give some good candid feedback, because any feedback that you give us is just going to make the next conference that much better and that much more applicable to what we all want to see and to learn about. So again, really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you to all the presenters one more time. And we're going to sign off here. Everyone have a great day.